You should marry my sister." The words sliced through the summer air like a blade through silk. Every head at the garden party turned. Clara Whitmore felt her stomach drop as her 8-year-old sister stood nose to waist with the Duke of Blackthorn, the most powerful, untouchable man in English society, and declared this mortifying proclamation loud enough for half of London to hear. Clara's carefully constructed life, built on logic and botanical research, was about to shatter. Because the Duke wasn't laughing. He was staring directly at her with eyes that saw too much. Stay with us until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Clara Whitmore had never believed in fate, destiny, or any of the romantic nonsense that other women her age seemed to consume like sweetmeats. At 26, she'd made peace with spinsterhood the way one makes peace with a chronic ailment. Acknowledge it exists, then get on with living. The Ashford Summer Garden Party was exactly the kind of event she avoided. Too many people, too much performance, too many mothers eyeing every unmarried woman like they were specimens under glass, cataloging flaws and calculating market value. But her mother had insisted, and more importantly, Clara had lost track of Lily. Her youngest sister had a talent for disappearing at precisely the wrong moments, usually to befriend some garden creature or interrogate a hapless servant about the migratory patterns of swallows. At 8 years old, Lily possessed the kind of fearless curiosity that Clara remembered having once, before she'd learned that curiosity in women was called unnatural and off-putting. Clara wove through clusters of guests, their laughter sharp as champagne bubbles. The Ashford estate sprawled across manicured lawns that probably cost more to maintain than most families earned in a year. Roses climbed trellises with aggressive perfection. Even the bees seemed orchestrated. She checked the lily pond, empty except for actual lilies. The hedge maze, she knew better than to venture in there. She'd need a search party. The refreshment tent. "Miss Whitmore!" Lady Pemberton materialized like a pastel nightmare, all ruffles and determined smile. "How delightful to see you. I was just telling Mrs. Hartley about your little plant hobby. So charmingly eccentric." Little plant hobby. Clara had published 2 papers in the Journal of Botanical Sciences. She'd identified a previously unknown subspecies of primrose. But sure, hobby. How kind of you to think of me, Lady Pemberton. Clara's smile felt like it might crack her face. "Have you seen my sister? About this tall, probably asking inappropriate questions?" "Oh, children are such treasures, aren't they? Speaking of which, my nephew just returned from Oxford. Brilliant young man, very serious about his studies in—" She paused, searching. "Well, something terribly important, I'm sure. You two would have much to discuss." Clara recognized an ambush when she saw one. "I really must find Lily." "Nonsense, he's just over by the—" "Oh!" Lady Pemberton's expression shifted, her eyes fixing on something over Clara's shoulder. The chatter around them seemed to dim slightly, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. Clara turned. The Duke of Blackthorn stood near the marble fountain at the garden's center. She'd seen him before, of course. Everyone had. At the theater, stepping from a carriage. At the Royal Society lecture last month, where he'd asked the speaker a question so precise it had reframed the entire presentation. You didn't reach her age in London society without being aware of Adrian Blackthorn the way you were aware of weather systems or the Thames, a force that shaped everything around it. But she'd never been this close. He was taller than she'd realized, with the kind of posture that suggested either military training or a childhood spent being told to sit up straight at every meal. Dark hair, unfashionably longer than current style dictated. His face had the severe angularity of someone who'd never smiled casually in their life, all sharp lines and harder edges, like he'd been carved rather than born. And currently, he was looking down at something with an expression Clara couldn't quite parse. Her stomach dropped. Lily. Her sister stood directly in front of the Duke, tiny fists planted on her hips, head tilted back at an angle that had to hurt her neck. She was talking animatedly, gesturing with the kind of wild enthusiasm that usually preceded disaster. "Oh my," Lady Pemberton breathed. "Is that your sister speaking to the Duke?" Clara was already moving. She pushed through the crowd as politely as possible, which was to say not very politely at all. Guests parted with offended murmurs. Someone's elbow caught her shoulder. She didn't care. As she got closer, Lily's voice cut through the ambient noise with the clarity of a bell. "And she knows everything about plants. Everything. She can tell you why some flowers only bloom at night, and which ones are actually poisonous, even though they look pretty. She's much smarter than people think just because she doesn't giggle at stupid jokes." Clara felt heat crawl up her neck. The Duke hadn't moved. He stood perfectly still, watching Lily with the kind of attention most people reserve for things that might explode. "Lily," Clara said, reaching them. "There you are." Lily spun around, her face lighting up. "Clara, I was just telling the Duke about you." "I heard." Clara's smile felt like broken glass. She forced herself to meet the Duke's eyes. Up close they were gray, not soft gray, the gray of winter storms, of steel, of things that didn't bend. "Your Grace, I apologize for the interruption. My sister is truthful." He had a low voice, quieter than she'd expected. Not soft, but controlled, like he was used to people leaning in to hear him. Clara blinked. "I was going to say enthusiastic." "She speaks her mind. It's refreshing." There was no warmth in his tone, no indication that he meant it as a compliment. He stated it like an observation, a fact to be catalogued and filed away. Lily, oblivious to the growing audience of whisper-prone guests circling them, bounced on her toes. "I was telling him how you're not married because you're too busy being brilliant, but that actually you'd be perfect for someone who's also serious and smart, and Lily." Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. She softened it with effort. "Perhaps we should let His Grace return to his conversation." "I wasn't having a conversation," the Duke said. "I was escaping one." A small sound escaped Clara. Half laugh, half exhale. She caught it too late. His eyes shifted to her fully for the first time, and she felt the impact of his attention like a physical thing. It was unnerving being looked at like that. Most people's gazes skated across her, polite acknowledgement, quick assessment, then moving on. His didn't skate. It landed and stayed. "You're the botanist," he said. Not a question, a statement. "I study botany, yes." Clara kept her voice even. "Among other things." "You published a paper on primrose adaptation last spring. The variation patterns in chalk-rich soil." The world tilted slightly. "You read that?" The methodology was sound. He paused, and something that might have been the ghost of expression crossed his face. "Though your conclusions about competitive exclusion could have been explored further." Clara felt her spine straighten. "My conclusions were supported by 18 months of field research across 4 distinct geographic locations. If you have alternative data, I don't." He cut her off, not rudely, but with the finality of someone unused to being questioned. "I said they could have been explored further, not that they were wrong." Lily looked between them with undisguised delight. "See? You're already having a smart conversation. This is perfect." "Lily, enough." Clara grabbed her sister's hand, perhaps more firmly than necessary. She turned back to the Duke, constructing her most diplomatic smile. "Your Grace, I truly apologize for the disruption. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon." She was already turning when he spoke again. "You should marry my sister." The words froze Clara mid-step. She turned back slowly, certain she'd misheard. The Duke was looking at Lily with something that might have been amusement in a person capable of such an expression. "That's what you said to me. You should marry my sister. It's an unusual introduction." "It's true, though." Lily pulled against Clara's grip. "You're both always thinking and never having fun. You'd be good for each other." The murmuring around them had grown louder. Clara could feel eyes on her back, could practically hear the mental notes being taken. Lady Ashford's garden party, the botanist's peculiar sister, the Duke of Blackthorn. How scandalous. How delicious. "She's 8, Clara said tightly. She doesn't understand." "I understand plenty," Lily's voice rose. "I understand you spend every evening alone in that stupid greenhouse pretending you like it. I understand Mama cries in her room because she thinks you're lonely. I understand." "That's enough." Clara's voice came out harder than she'd meant it to. Lily's eyes went wide, then filled with tears. Perfect. Wonderful. This nightmare had officially achieved new depths. Clara bent down, keeping her voice low. "Lily, we're going home. Now." "But I was just trying to help." "Now." She straightened, refusing to look at the Duke, refusing to acknowledge the crowd of spectators who would dine out on this story for weeks. She took one step away when his voice stopped her again. "Miss Whitmore." She should have kept walking. Every instinct screamed to keep walking. She turned. He was still standing in that perfect, controlled posture, but something in his expression had shifted. It wasn't softness. She doubted this man had ever been soft in his life, but there was a quality of attention that hadn't been there before, a focus that made her breath catch. "The Q lecture next Thursday," he said, "on evolutionary adaptation in orchid reproduction. I assume you'll be attending?" Clara's mind stuttered. Kew Gardens. She'd been planning to attend for weeks. The lecturer was Dr. Harrison, whose work on pollination strategies was groundbreaking. But how did he... It's open to Botanical Society members, he continued, answering her unspoken question. Your name was on the attendance list. I happened to see it. Happened. As if men like him just happened to do anything. Yes, she managed. Yes, I'll be there. He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. Good. That was all. Just good. Then he turned and walked away, cutting through the crowd with the ease of someone who never had to ask people to move. They simply did. Clara stood there, Lily's hand in hers, trying to process what had just happened. Around them, the whispers swelled like a rising tide. Did you hear? Actually spoke to her. That bizarre child. Blackthorn never speaks to anyone. Lily tugged on her hand. Clara, are you angry at me? Clara looked down at her sister's tear-streaked face and felt her anger deflate. She sighed. No, Mouse, I'm not angry. You said we're going home. We are going home. But the party's not over. There's still cake. Clara started walking toward the house, towing Lily along. We're done with this party. Trust me. They made it approximately 10 feet before their mother intercepted them. Eleanor Whitmore had the kind of face that might have been beautiful if worry hadn't carved permanent lines around her mouth and eyes. She was dressed in her best gown, not best enough for this crowd, Clara noted with familiar guilt, and her smile looked painted on. Girls, there you are. I've been looking everywhere. Her eyes darted past them to the dispersing crowd, calculating, assessing. What happened? I heard Lady Pemberton say something about the Duke. Lily happened, Clara said shortly. I was helping, Lily protested. You absolutely were not. Eleanor's hand fluttered to her throat. What did she do? Clara, what happened? Clara felt exhaustion settle over her like a heavy coat. Can we discuss this at home, please? But Eleanor was already scanning the garden, her face cycling through emotions, concern, confusion, and then something that made Clara's stomach sink. Hope. Did he speak to you, the Duke? I heard voices. Mama, it was nothing. A misunderstanding. Can we please... Nothing? Eleanor's laugh came out too high, too bright. The Duke of Blackthorn doesn't speak to people about nothing, Clara. What did he say? Clara thought about lying. She thought about simplifying. She thought about all the ways this could be misinterpreted and twisted and turned into something it absolutely was not. Then she thought about how her mother looked these days. Thinner, older, the worry lines deepening every time Clara declined another invitation, another introduction, another chance at the kind of future Eleanor had always imagined for her. He mentioned a lecture at Kew, Clara said carefully, on orchids. He noted I'd be attending. Eleanor's eyes widened. He knew you'd be attending? How did he... She cut herself off, her mind clearly racing. A lecture. That's something. That's certainly something. It's nothing, Mama. He likely saw my name on some list. But he remembered it. Eleanor clutched Clara's arm. Don't you see? The Duke of Blackthorn remembered your name. He sought you out to mention it. He didn't seek me out. He was accosted by your youngest daughter who decided to play matchmaker. Details. Eleanor waved a hand. The point is, he engaged with you. He acknowledged your attendance at an intellectual event. Clara, that's not nothing. Clara looked at her mother, really looked at her, saw the desperate hope in her eyes, the same hope that had been slowly dimming over the past few years as Clara aged out of marriageability, saw the weight of social pressure and financial anxiety and the knowledge that their family's modest circumstances couldn't support 3 daughters forever. Guilt twisted in her chest. Mama, please don't read into this. The Duke he's not... She searched for words. Men like him don't marry women like me. Why not? Eleanor's voice took on an edge. Because you're intelligent? Because you care about more than needlework and gossip? Because you've spent your life studying real things instead of pretending to be empty-headed? Because I'm not titled. Because our father was a country doctor. Because I'm 26 and far too old to be interesting to someone like... He's 34, Eleanor interrupted. Never married. Never even courted anyone seriously, according to Lady Hartwell. He avoids social events. He spends his time in his library or at lectures or managing his estates. She fixed Clara with a meaningful look. Sound familiar? Clara's jaw tightened. That doesn't mean... It means he's not looking for some simpering debutante. It means maybe, just maybe, your differences are actually what makes you suitable. Eleanor, came their father's voice. Robert Whitmore approached with his usual quiet step, his medical bag in hand. He must have just arrived from his rounds. Perhaps we should discuss this at home. Of course. Eleanor's expression smoothed immediately, but her hand remained tight on Clara's arm. We were just leaving. Come, girls. The carriage ride home was mercifully short, but felt endless. Lily chattered nervously, trying to fill the silence. Robert read correspondence, his face unreadable. Eleanor stared out the window, her mind clearly elsewhere. Clara watched the London streets roll past and tried not to think about gray eyes and a voice that didn't rise even when challenged. Tried not to think about the way he'd said good, like he actually cared whether she attended that lecture or not. Tried not to think about the strange, unsettled feeling that had taken root in her chest the moment their eyes met. She failed spectacularly at all three. Their home in Bloomsbury was modest but respectable, a narrow townhouse with a garden barely large enough for Clara's greenhouse. It wasn't fashionable, but it was theirs, purchased with her father's careful savings and her mother's inheritance. Clara headed straight for the greenhouse the moment they arrived. Clara, her mother started. I need to check the specimens, Clara said without stopping. The propagation experiment should be entering its critical phase. It wasn't true. The experiment was fine, but the greenhouse was her sanctuary, the one place where things made sense, where variables could be controlled and outcomes predicted, where feelings didn't matter and logic reigned supreme. The greenhouse was warm and humid, smelling of soil and growth. Late afternoon sun filtered through the glass panels, creating patterns on the floor. Clara moved between her specimens automatically, checking moisture levels, noting new growth, adjusting positions. She lost herself in the work. Let it steady her. I'm sorry. Clara turned. Lily stood in the doorway, still in her party dress, looking smaller than usual. I know you said I'm not supposed to talk to strange men, Lily continued in a rush, but he wasn't strange, he was the Duke. And he was standing all alone looking sad, and I thought... She stopped, her lower lip trembling. I thought I was helping. I thought if you had someone like Mama has Papa, maybe you wouldn't look sad anymore either. Clara's heart cracked. She knelt down, ignoring the dirt on her skirt. Come here, Mouse. Lily crashed into her arms. I'm not sad, Clara said into her sister's hair. I'm just different. My life looks different than Mama's or other women's, and that's all right. But you're alone all the time. I'm alone because I choose to be. That's different than lonely. Lily pulled back, her expression skeptical beyond her years. Is it, though? Clara didn't have an answer for that. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind refusing to settle. You should marry my sister. The methodology was sound. Good. One word. Just one word delivered with no inflection, no obvious emotion. So why couldn't she stop hearing it? She rolled over, punched her pillow into a different shape, closed her eyes. His face appeared immediately in her mind, those sharp features, that controlled stillness, the way he'd looked at her like she was a puzzle to solve rather than a woman to charm. She opened her eyes. This was absurd. She was being absurd. One brief, awkward conversation at a garden party did not constitute anything. It meant nothing. He probably mentioned the lecture because he was trying to be polite after Lily's embarrassing declaration. Tomorrow he would forget her name. Next week she'd be lucky if he even remembered the encounter. Men like Adrian Blackthorne did not develop interest in women like Clara Whitmore. That was just reality. She repeated this to herself like a mantra until she finally fell into uneasy sleep. Thursday arrived with typical London weather, gray skies threatening rain but never quite committing to it. Clara dressed carefully, telling herself she was not dressing for any particular reason beyond general respectability. The fact that she changed her dress 3 times was irrelevant. The lecture at Kew Gardens was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Clara arrived at precisely 1:45, early enough to find a good seat, but not so early as to appear overeager. The lecture hall was smaller than the main auditorium, an intimate space designed for serious scholars rather than casual enthusiasts. Windows lined one wall, overlooking the gardens. Wooden chairs arranged in neat rows faced a podium where Dr. Harrison was already setting up his visual aids, detailed sketches of orchid reproductive structures. Clara chose a seat in the 3rd row, center section, close enough to see clearly, far enough back to not seem presumptuous. She pulled out her notebook, checked her pencil, and tried to ignore the way her pulse had picked up. The room filled gradually. She recognized several faces, fellow Botanical Society members, amateur naturalists, a few Royal Society fellows. The usual crowd for this kind of presentation. No Duke. Of course no Duke. Why would he attend? He probably received a dozen invitations to intellectual events every week and attended none of them. He'd probably mentioned it purely out of politeness. Clara was a fool for thinking, "Miss Whitmore." She jumped, nearly dropping her notebook. Adrian Blackthorne stood in the aisle beside her seat, looking exactly as he had at the garden party, severe, controlled, utterly out of place among the enthusiastic botanists. "Your Grace." She scrambled to her feet, which felt ridiculous because they weren't in a formal setting, but what else did you do when a duke addressed you? "I didn't. That is, I wasn't certain. May I sit here?" He gestured to the empty seat beside her. Clara's mind went blank. Completely, utterly blank. She swallowed. "Yes, of course. Please." He sat with the same controlled precision he seemed to do everything. No unnecessary movement, no casual settling. Just a smooth transition from standing to seated, his posture remaining perfect. The woman in front of them turned around, looked at the Duke, looked at Clara, and raised her eyebrows so high they nearly left her face. Clara stared at her notebook. "I've been reviewing your Primrose paper," he said after a moment, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "There's an aspect of the root structure analysis I wanted to discuss. The comparative measurements between chalk and limestone samples." Claire's brain struggled to shift gears from social panic to scientific discussion. Yes, the root structures. What about them? You noted significant variation in lateral root density, but attributed it primarily to water retention differences. I wondered if you'd considered mycorrhizal associations as a contributing factor. Despite herself, Clara felt her interest spark. "I did consider it, but the microscopic analysis didn't show consistent colonization patterns. Though," she paused, thinking, "though I only examined samples from the upper root zone. If the associations were concentrated deeper in the soil profile, I might have missed them." "Exactly." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes that suggested approval. "It's a gap in the existing literature. No one's done systematic depth profile analysis of mycorrhizal colonization in primrose species. Because it would require excavating entire root systems without damage," Clara said slowly, her mind already working through the logistics. "The time investment alone would be considerable," he finished, "but worthwhile. The data would be novel." They stared at each other for a moment, and Clara had the strangest sensation of recognition. Not of him as a person, she didn't know him, but of something in the way his mind worked, the way he jumped straight to the interesting question instead of accepting surface-level explanations. "I'd need multiple site locations," she said, almost to herself, "controlled for soil composition but varying in other ecological factors. And a team. The excavation work couldn't be done by one person." "The Blackthorne estate has extensive chalk down land," he said, "undisturbed primrose populations, and I have ground staff who could be trained in careful excavation techniques." Clara blinked. "You're offering your estate for research?" "I'm suggesting it as a possibility, if you were interested in pursuing the study." Before Clara could respond, Dr. Harrison cleared his throat at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could please take our seats, we'll be beginning shortly." The room settled. Clara faced forward, acutely aware of the Duke sitting beside her, so still he might have been carved from stone. Dr. Harrison launched into his presentation with enthusiasm, describing the bizarre evolutionary adaptations orchids had developed to ensure pollination. The pseudo-copulation strategy of bee orchids, the complex scent chemistry that attracted specific moth species, the mechanical triggers that forced pollen attachment. It was fascinating. Clara took notes rapidly, her mind engaging with the material, but she was also aware, painfully, constantly aware, of the presence beside her. The Duke took no notes. He simply watched, occasionally leaning forward slightly when a particularly interesting point was made. Once, when Dr. Harrison made a claim about pollination efficiency that seemed questionable, Clara heard him make a small sound, barely audible, somewhere between skepticism and amusement. She glanced over without thinking. He was already looking at her. Their eyes met, and for a moment they shared something wordless, mutual recognition of the weak logic in the presenter's argument. A silent communication that required no language. Clara looked away first, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. The lecture continued. Clara forced herself to focus on the content, not on the man beside her who somehow took up more space than he physically occupied. When Dr. Harrison finally concluded and opened the floor for questions, several hands shot up immediately. Clara had questions too, specific ones about the methodology, but she hesitated. "You should ask," the Duke said quietly beside her. "I wasn't—" "You've been tapping your pencil against your notebook for the past 5 minutes. You do that when you're thinking. Ask your question." Clara turned to stare at him. "How would you know what I do when I'm thinking? We've spoken for all of 20 minutes. 37 minutes, counting this conversation. And you did the same thing at the garden party when you were about to challenge my statement about your conclusions. The pencil tapping, it's a tell." She had no idea what to do with the fact that he'd been paying enough attention to notice such a thing. "Ask your question, Miss Whitmore," he said again. So she did. Dr. Harrison's answer was adequate but not entirely satisfying, leading to a brief but spirited exchange about sample sizes and statistical significance. Other attendees jumped in. The discussion grew animated. Through it all, Clara felt the Duke's attention on her like a physical weight. When the lecture finally concluded, people began filing out, clustering in small groups to continue their discussions. Clara stood, gathering her notebook and pencil. "Thank you for the conversation, Your Grace," she said, falling back on formal politeness because she had no idea what else to say to this strange, intense man. "It was educational." "Adrian," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "My name is Adrian. You should use it." "I couldn't possibly—" "Why not?" He stood, and she was reminded again of how tall he was, how his presence seemed to compress the space around him. "We're colleagues, aren't we? Discussing shared scientific interests? Colleagues use given names." "We're not colleagues. You're a—" She caught herself. "We occupy very different social positions." "Yes," he agreed. "You're a published researcher with original contributions to botanical science. I'm a titled aristocrat whose primary qualification is being born to the right parents. Your position is considerably more legitimate than mine." Clara stared at him, completely unsure if he was serious. His expression gave nothing away. "I appreciate the sentiment," she said carefully, "but society doesn't quite see it that way. Society sees many things incorrectly." He paused, seeming to consider something. "There's a lecture next month at the Royal Institution on competitive exclusion in ecological niches. I thought you might find it relevant, given your research interests." Are you inviting me to another lecture?" "I'm informing you of its existence. What you choose to do with that information is your decision." Before Clara could formulate a response, a voice cut through the crowd. "Blackthorne, there you are!" A man approached, younger than Adrian, dressed in the kind of casual elegance that suggested he'd never worried about the cost of anything in his life. Handsome in a conventional way, with golden hair and an easy smile. "Nathaniel," Adrian said, his tone cooling noticeably. "I didn't realize you were in London. Just arrived yesterday. Father wants me to attend some tedious committee meetings about—" He waved a hand vaguely. "Something governmental and boring. I saw you slip in here and thought I'd rescue you from the academic types." His eyes landed on Clara, and his smile widened. "Though perhaps you don't need rescuing." "Miss Whitmore," Adrian said, his voice flat. "This is Lord Nathaniel Ashford. Nathaniel, Miss Clara Whitmore. Ashford, the family hosting the garden party where this entire bizarre situation began." "A pleasure, Miss Whitmore." Nathaniel executed a slight bow. "Any friend of Adrian's is worth knowing, though I must say I've never seen him voluntarily attend a lecture on plants before. You must have quite the influence." "We share research interests," Clara said stiffly. "Nothing more." Of course, of course." Nathaniel's tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. "Adrian, we should discuss that matter Father mentioned, about the—" "Not here," Adrian cut him off. He turned to Clara, and something in his expression shifted, became, if possible, even more closed off than usual. "Miss Whitmore, thank you for the discussion. I look forward to continuing it another time." He left without waiting for a response, Nathaniel trailing behind him, talking animatedly about something Clara couldn't hear. She stood there in the emptying lecture hall, trying to parse what had just happened. Adrian. He'd asked her to call him Adrian. She definitely wasn't going to do that. Over the next week, Clara tried to return to her normal routine. She worked in her greenhouse. She reviewed journals. She corresponded with other researchers about her ongoing projects. She absolutely did not think about Adrian Blackthorne. Except she did. Constantly. It was infuriating. She kept replaying their conversations, analyzing them the way she'd analyze experimental results. Looking for patterns, trying to extract meaning from data points. But people weren't plants. They didn't follow predictable rules, especially not people like him, self-contained and controlled, revealing nothing. "You're thinking about him again," Lily said one afternoon, appearing in the greenhouse doorway with her usual ninja-like stealth. Clara nearly dropped the pot she was holding. "I'm thinking about primroses." "You make the same face when you think about him as when you think about primroses, sort of concentrated and confused." "I don't make faces." "You absolutely make faces." Lily hopped up onto the workbench, swinging her legs. "Mama thinks you're going to marry him." Clara's hands stilled. "Mama thinks what?" She told Aunt Patricia that the Duke is showing interest. Those were her exact words. Then Aunt Patricia got all excited and started talking about wedding dates. A cold knot formed in Clara's stomach. "Lily, we're not... It's just intellectual conversation, that's all." "That's what you keep saying." Lily examined her fingernails with studied casualness. "But he came to a lecture just to sit next to you, and Papa says men don't do that unless they're interested." "Papa said that?" "I overheard him telling Mama not to get her hopes up too high, but that the signs were encouraging." Lily made air quotes with her fingers. "What signs?" Clara set down the pot carefully before she could break it. "There are no signs. There's no interest. There's just two people who happen to share intellectual pursuits discussing shared intellectual pursuits. That's all it is." Even as she said it, she heard the lie in her own voice. Because it wasn't just intellectual, was it? If it were purely about research, she wouldn't replay the way he'd said her name. Wouldn't wonder about the almost expression that crossed his face when she asked good questions. Wouldn't feel this strange, unsettled awareness whenever she thought about him. "You should go to that lecture," Lily said. "The one next month he mentioned." "I haven't decided yet." "Clara." Lily's voice took on a seriousness beyond her years. "I know I messed up at the garden party. I know I embarrassed you, but..." He didn't laugh at me. He didn't dismiss me like most adults do when kids talk to them. He listened. She met Clara's eyes. "And then he sought you out. That means something. It means he's polite." "No." Lily shook her head firmly. "Polite is nodding and walking away. He came to the lecture. He sat next to you. He talked about your research like it mattered to him. That's not polite. That's interested." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the logical reasons why the Duke of Blackthorn couldn't possibly be interested in a spinster botanist from an unremarkable family. But Lily had already hopped off the bench and headed toward the door. "Just think about it," her sister said over her shoulder. "And maybe think about why you're so determined to believe it's impossible." Then she was gone, leaving Clara alone with her primroses and her increasingly complicated thoughts. The letter arrived 3 days later. Clara found it on her desk in the morning. Expensive paper, precise handwriting, sealed with wax that bore no crest. She stared at it for a full minute before opening it. "Miss Whitmore, I've been giving thought to the mycorrhizal research we discussed. If you're amenable, I'd like to invite you to tour the relevant sites at the Blackthorn estate. The chalk downland areas would be accessible for assessment, and we could discuss the feasibility of the proposed study. I realize this is unorthodox. If you prefer, you may bring a companion. My head groundskeeper, Thomas, is knowledgeable about the local ecology and could provide additional context. The estate is approximately 2 hours from London by carriage. I would, of course, provide transportation both ways. Please let me know your decision at your earliest convenience." A B, just a B. Not Blackthorn or His Grace or any of the formal signatures a duke would typically use. Clara read it 3 times. This was insane. Going to a duke's private estate? Alone or even with a companion? Society would have her labeled either a fortune hunter or something worse before the carriage made it out of London. But the offer was genuine, professional. He wanted to discuss research, not whatever it was her mother was hoping for. She should decline. The sensible thing was to decline. She picked up her pen. "Your Grace, I appreciate your generous offer. While I recognize the value of on-site assessment, I must respectfully decline." She stopped, crossed it out, started again. "Adrian, no. Absolutely not. Too familiar." "Your Grace, I would be interested in touring the sites you mentioned. However, given the propriety concerns, I wonder if we might arrange a meeting at Kew instead, where we could discuss the..." She crumpled the paper. This was ridiculous. She was being ridiculous. She wanted to go. Wanted to see the sites, assess the population density, evaluate the soil conditions. This was valuable research opportunity. Why should she decline just because society had stupid rules about unmarried women and men's estates? She wrote quickly, before she could overthink it further. "Your Grace, Thank you for the invitation. I would be glad to tour the sites. I'll bring my sister as companion. She's expressed interest in botanical fieldwork, and this would be educational for her. Please let me know when would be convenient. Clara Whitmore. She sealed it before she could change her mind, then called for a messenger to deliver it immediately. Done. It was done. She spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous energy that had nothing to do with research opportunities and everything to do with the fact that she was going to spend several hours alone, well, with Lily, with a man who made her feel unsettled in ways she couldn't quite name. The reply came the next morning. Miss Whitmore, Saturday next would be suitable. I'll send the carriage at 9 o'clock. Bring appropriate footwear for fieldwork. The terrain can be challenging. A B. Clara stared at the note, her heart doing something complicated. This was just research, just science. She repeated that to herself like a prayer. It didn't help at all. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect English weather that felt like mockery. Bright sun, clear skies, as if the universe itself was conspiring to remove any excuse for cancellation. Clara stood in front of her wardrobe at 7 in the morning, staring at her limited options with rising panic. What did one wear to tour a duke's estate for botanical research? Too formal would look presumptuous. Too casual would be disrespectful, and anything remotely fashionable would send the wrong message entirely. She settled on a practical walking dress in dark green, sturdy enough for fieldwork, plain enough to avoid any misinterpretation. Her hair she pinned severely back. No jewelry except her mother's simple locket. You look like you're going to a funeral, Lily observed from the doorway, already dressed in her own walking clothes. A very botanical funeral. I look appropriate, Clara corrected. This is a professional visit. Right, professional. Lily's tone suggested she believed that about as much as she believed in fairies. That's why you've changed clothes 4 times. 3 times. I saw the blue dress on your bed. That makes 4. Clara gave up and headed downstairs. Her mother was waiting in the sitting room, wearing an expression that managed to combine hope, anxiety, and maternal scheming in equal measure. You'll be careful, Eleanor said, catching Clara's hands. Mind your conversation. Be respectful but not obsequious. And for heaven's sake, if he offers refreshment, accept it. Refusing would be rude. Mama, this is a research trip, not a courtship visit. Eleanor's smile turned knowing. My dear, when a duke personally invites you to his private estate, it's never just research. Before Clara could respond, the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestone announced their transportation's arrival. The carriage that waited outside was understated by aristocratic standards, but still far finer than anything the Whitmore family could afford. Dark lacquer, perfectly maintained, pulled by 4 matched grays. No family crest on the door, just that same deliberate anonymity she'd noticed in his letter. A footman helped them inside. The interior was comfortable without being ostentatious. Leather seats, good suspension, windows with actual glass instead of oilcloth. Lily pressed her nose against the window as they pulled away. This is brilliant. Wait until I tell... You'll tell no one, Clara said firmly. This isn't a story for sharing, but no one, Lily. I mean it. The ride took them out of London's cramped streets into increasingly open countryside. Clara tried to focus on the passing landscape, cataloging plant species and hedgerows, but her mind kept drifting. What was she doing? This was insane. She was traveling to a private estate with a man she barely knew, based on conversations that might be nothing more than polite interest from someone with too much time and too few intellectual challenges. You're thinking too loud, Lily said. I can practically hear your brain spinning. I'm just considering the research parameters. You're panicking. Clara shot her a look. I'm not panicking. Your left hand is doing that thing where you tap your thumb against your fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. You only do that when you're nervous. Clara stopped the movement immediately. When did you become so observant? I've always been observant. You've just been too busy with plants to notice. Lily tilted her head, studying her sister. It's all right to be nervous, you know. He makes you nervous because you like him. I don't... Clara cut herself off. This isn't about liking anyone. This is professional. Professional. Lily tested the word. Is that why you wore your nice dress? The one you saved for special occasions? This isn't my nice dress. This is practical fieldwork attire. It's the one you wore to the Royal Society presentation when you were hoping to meet Dr. Harrison. Clara had no response to that because Lily was absolutely correct, and they both knew it. The countryside opened up as they traveled further from the city. Rolling hills, dense woods, patches of cultivated farmland interspersed with wild meadows, the kind of landscape that made Clara's fingers itch for her specimen collection tools. After nearly 2 hours, the carriage turned onto a private drive. Trees lined both sides, ancient oaks that must have been planted centuries ago. Between them, Clara caught glimpses of expansive grounds, carefully managed but not overly manicured. Then the house came into view. "Oh," Lily breathed. It wasn't the largest estate Clara had seen, but it was certainly the most imposing she'd been personally invited to. 3 stories of pale stone, classical proportions, windows that caught the morning light, wings extending on either side suggested the main building was just the beginning. The carriage pulled to a stop in the circular drive. Before the footman could open the door, it swung open from the outside. Adrian Blackthorne stood there, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him. No formal coat, just shirt sleeves and a waistcoat, boots that showed actual use. He looked younger somehow, less severe without all the formal trappings of his position. "Miss Whitmore, Miss Lily." He offered his hand to help them down. "Thank you for coming." His hand was warm through her glove, his grip firm and brief. Clara tried not to analyze the small shock that went through her at the contact. "Thank you for the invitation, Your Grace," she managed. "Adrian," he corrected quietly. "We're here for research, not ceremony." Lily hopped down without assistance, staring up at the house with undisguised awe. "This is where you live? It's enormous." "It's inefficient," Adrian replied. "Most of the rooms are unused, but yes, this is where I live when I'm not in London." He gestured toward a path leading away from the main house. "The downland areas are this direction. I thought we'd start there, assess the site conditions. Thomas is waiting to provide historical context about the land management." They followed him along a gravel path that wound through formal gardens before opening onto wilder grounds. The transition was stark, manicured lawns giving way to natural grassland, the kind of habitat that couldn't be replicated in cultivation. Thomas turned out to be a weathered man in his 60s with the kind of hands that spoke of a lifetime working soil. He nodded respectfully as they approached. "Miss Whitmore, this is Thomas Garrett. He's been managing these grounds for 40 years and knows every plant species within 10 miles. "Pleasure, miss." Thomas's accent was local, his eyes sharp with intelligence. "His Grace tells me you're interested in the primrose populations." "Very much so," Clara said, relieved to be on familiar professional ground, particularly the root structure variations in chalk soil. Thomas's expression brightened. "Ah, then you'll want to see the north slope. We've primroses there that have been undisturbed since before my time. Dense populations, healthy specimens." He led them across the downland, pointing out features as they walked. Adrian followed slightly behind, letting Thomas guide the conversation, but occasionally adding observations that demonstrated an unexpected depth of knowledge about his own land. The north slope was perfect, exactly the kind of site Clara would have chosen herself. Chalk-rich soil, good drainage, established plant communities showing minimal human interference. She knelt in the grass, examining the primrose clusters with growing excitement. "The density here is remarkable. And look," she pointed to a specimen with unusually robust leaves. "This population shows considerable genetic diversity that's increasingly rare in managed landscapes." "Because most estates graze these areas heavily," Adrian said, crouching beside her. "Thomas convinced my father to leave this section alone. Let it be what it wanted to be." "Seemed ashamed to interfere," Thomas added. "Nature knows what it's doing better than we do, most times." Lily had wandered a short distance away, examining something in the grass. Clara was about to call her back when Adrian spoke again. "If we were to pursue the mycorrhizal study, we'd need to establish excavation protocols that minimize damage to the surrounding population." Clara pulled her focus back. "Yes. The challenge is accessing deep root structures without disrupting the entire soil profile. It would require careful technique and probably multiple attempts to refine the method." "How deep would you need to go?" "At least 30 centimeters, possibly deeper. Mycorrhizal associations in chalk soils can extend quite far below the visible root crown." They discussed logistics for several minutes. Sample sizes, seasonal timing, data collection methods. It was the kind of detailed planning that most people would find tedious, but Clara felt her enthusiasm building. This was real research, novel work that could contribute meaningfully to botanical understanding. "You're smiling," Adrian observed. Clara touched her face, startled. She had been smiling. This is exactly the kind of project I've wanted to pursue, the kind that requires resources I don't have access to on my own. But you have access now, he said. His gray eyes held hers with that peculiar intensity. If you want it. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Clara couldn't quite name. Then Lily's voice shattered it. Clara, come look at this. Clara stood quickly, perhaps too quickly, and moved toward her sister. Lily was kneeling beside a different primrose cluster, pointing at something. Look at the color variation. These ones are almost white compared to the yellow ones over there. Good eye, Clara said, crouching beside her. That's likely environmental influence on pigment expression. Chalk pH can affect flower coloration. Could be genetic variation too, Adrian said from behind them. He'd followed but maintained a respectful distance. If the populations are old enough, they may have developed distinct local adaptations. Clara glanced back at him. That would require genetic analysis to confirm, though it would be fascinating if true. Local adaptation in primrose populations isn't well documented. Another research question, he said, another reason to excavate carefully and collect comprehensive data. Their eyes met again, and Clara felt that same electric awareness she'd experienced at the lecture. Like they were communicating on multiple levels simultaneously, the surface conversation about research and something deeper, unspoken, that made her pulse quicken. Thomas cleared his throat. Perhaps the young ladies would like some refreshment. It's near midday, and the walk back to the house is a fair distance. Clara seized the escape. Yes, that would be appreciated. Thank you. The walk back felt different than the walk out. Adrian walked beside her now, rather than behind, close enough that she was hyper-aware of his presence. They talked about the site, about potential challenges in the research design, about timeline considerations, professional topics, safe topics. But underneath the safe conversation, Clara felt something building, a tension that had nothing to do with botany and everything to do with the way his voice dropped when he spoke only to her, the way he watched her face when she talked, the way her body responded to his proximity. It was unsettling. And worse, it was exciting. The house was even more impressive inside. High ceilings, classical proportions, artwork that probably cost more than her family's entire home. But Adrian led them past all the formal rooms to a conservatory at the back of the house. Clara stopped in the doorway, her breath catching. The conservatory was magnificent, not showy or excessive, but clearly built by someone who understood plants. Good light, proper ventilation, controlled humidity. Specimen plants arranged not for display, but for optimal growth. Orchids, ferns, tropical species that had no business surviving in English winter. You grow orchids, she said stupidly. I've been attempting to cultivate several species that typically only survive in greenhouse conditions, with limited success. He moved to one of the benches where a struggling specimen drooped in its pot. This one, for example, refuses to bloom no matter what I try. Clara approached, examining the plant. What's your watering schedule? Twice weekly. The soil stays consistently moist. That's your problem. This species needs a dry period between watering to trigger blooming. You're being too consistent. Adrian frowned at the plant like it had personally offended him. I've read 3 texts on orchid cultivation. All of them stressed consistent moisture. General advice. But different species have different requirements. This one, she touched the leaves gently. This one is used to seasonal variation in its natural habitat. Wet season, dry season. If you give it constant conditions, it has no environmental trigger to reproduce. So I've been killing it with kindness. Essentially, yes. A ghost of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but close. That seems to be a pattern with me. Before Clara could ask what he meant, Lily piped up from where she'd been exploring the other plants. You have a greenhouse too, like Clara's? Not like Clara's, I suspect, Adrian said. Hers is dedicated to serious research. This is more a hobby that got out of hand. It's impressive, Clara said honestly. Most amateur collectors focus on showy species. You've chosen plants that are actually challenging to cultivate. Showy plants bore me. I prefer problems to solve. Their eyes met again, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. There was something in the way he said it, in the way he was looking at her, that suggested he wasn't just talking about plants. A servant appeared with tea and sandwiches, setting up the service on a small table near the windows. They sat, Clara and Lily on a cushioned bench, Adrian in a chair positioned at a careful angle that allowed conversation but maintained propriety. The tea was excellent, the sandwiches better than anything Clara would have expected from aristocratic kitchens. Lily asked questions about the various plants, which Adrian answered with unexpected patience. Clara watched him interact with her sister and felt something shift inside her chest. He wasn't condescending or dismissive the way most adults were with children. He talked to Lily like she was a person whose opinions mattered, whose questions deserved real answers. "Your estate is beautiful," Clara said when the conversation lulled. "You must spend a great deal of time here." "When I can. London is necessary for business, but I prefer it here. Fewer people, fewer expectations." He paused, his long fingers wrapped around his teacup. "Fewer performances." Performances? Society requires constant performance. The right words, the right expressions, the right appearance of caring about things that don't matter. His voice remained level, but something sharp edged into it. "Here, I can simply be." Clara understood that more than he probably realized. "And what do you do when you're simply being?" "Read, work on the estate accounts, try to keep orchids alive, apparently unsuccessfully." The almost smile appeared again. "What do you do, Miss Whitmore?" "Clara," she said before she could stop herself. "If I'm to call you Adrian, you should call me Clara." His expression shifted. Something that might have been surprise or pleasure or both. "Clara, then, what do you do when you're not publishing groundbreaking research on primroses?" "It's hardly groundbreaking." "It is, though. Original field research with novel methodology and conclusions that challenge existing assumptions. That's the definition of groundbreaking." Heat crept up Clara's neck. She wasn't used to having her work taken seriously, much less praised. Thank you. Most people think it's just a pleasant hobby. Most people are idiots." The bluntness startled a laugh out of her. "You can't say that." "Why not? It's true." He set down his teacup with precise care. "Intelligence makes people uncomfortable. They'd rather pretend it doesn't exist than acknowledge their own limitations. So they diminish it, call it cute or eccentric or a hobby. Anything to avoid admitting they're threatened by it." Clara stared at him, something unfurling in her chest. "You actually understand. I understand being told your interests are inappropriate for your station. I understand having to hide what you actually think because honesty makes people uncomfortable." His gray eyes held hers. "I understand spending most of your life feeling like you're speaking a language no one else hears." The conservatory felt suddenly smaller, the air charged with something electric. Clara couldn't look away from him, couldn't pretend this was just professional courtesy or aristocratic politeness. He saw her, really saw her. Not as a spinster botanist or an eccentric curiosity, but as someone like him, someone who existed slightly outside the world's expectations, never quite fitting into the space society insisted they occupy. "Clara," Lily said loudly, breaking the moment, "I need to use the facilities." Clara blinked, the spell breaking. "Oh, of course." She looked at Adrian helplessly. He stood smoothly. "I'll have someone show you the way. Clara, there's something in the library I thought you might find interesting. Would you like to see it while we wait?" She should say no, should insist on accompanying Lily, on maintaining proper chaperonage, should not go off alone with him to a library. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I'd like that." A servant appeared to escort Lily. Adrian led Clara back through the house, down a wide corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge her very presence. The library was everything Clara had dreamed libraries could be. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladders, comfortable chairs positioned to catch natural light. But it was the books themselves that made her breath catch. Not just leather-bound decoration, but actual working volumes, spines creased from use, papers tucked between pages as bookmarks. "You've actually read them," she said. "Most of them. Some multiple times." Adrian moved to a specific section, running his fingers along the spines until he found what he wanted. He pulled out a slim volume, its cover worn with age. "This is what I wanted to show you." He handed it to her. The title, embossed in fading gold, Observations on Root Morphology in Calciphyll Flora. Clara opened it carefully. The publication date was 1783. Inside, hand-drawn illustrations showed detailed root structure studies of various chalk-loving plants, including primroses. "This is..." She looked up at him. "Where did you find this?" "A state library. It's been here for decades, probably centuries. My grandfather was an amateur naturalist. He collected obscure botanical texts." Adrian moved closer, pointing to a specific illustration. "Look at this drawing. The artist captured mycorrhizal structures without knowing what they were. See these thread-like projections?" Clara looked where he indicated, her excitement growing. These predate modern mycorrhizal research by over a century. This is extraordinary. I thought you might find it useful, for historical context. She turned pages slowly, reverently. Each illustration was precise, detailed, clearly drawn from direct observation rather than imagination. Would it be possible to borrow this? Or at least photograph the relevant sections? You may have it. Clara's head snapped up. I couldn't possibly. Why not? It's doing no good sitting on a shelf where no one reads it. You'll actually use it. That's what books are for. But this is a rare historical text. It belongs in your family collection. My family is dead, Adrian said flatly, and the estate will be here long after I'm gone, accumulating more dust and unused resources. Take the book. Make it mean something. Clara clutched it to her chest, overwhelmed. Thank you. Truly. They stood there in the library's quiet, surrounded by thousands of books, and somehow feeling completely alone. Adrian was close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight imperfection in the bridge of his nose that suggested it had been broken once. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Always. Why are you doing this? The research opportunity, the resources, the attention. Why me? Adrian was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher than usual. Because when you talk about your work, your face lights up. Because you ask questions that actually interest me instead of questions designed to flatter me. Because you look at me like I'm a person instead of a title. He paused. Because when I'm around you, I don't feel like I'm performing. I feel like I'm finally speaking that language I mentioned. And someone is listening. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Adrian. The library door opened. Lily burst in, followed by a flustered-looking servant. I found the most amazing room upstairs, Lily announced. There's a whole gallery of paintings, and one of them has a horse that looks just like the one in our neighbor's field, and... She stopped, looking between them. Am I interrupting something? No, Clara said too quickly. We were just discussing the book. Lily's expression suggested she didn't believe that for a second, but she had enough sense not to push. We should probably head back soon. Mama will worry if we're late. She was right. The afternoon had disappeared while they'd been absorbed in plants and conversation. Clara reluctantly handed the book back to Adrian. Keep it, he said. I meant what I said. She took it back, holding it carefully. Thank you. For everything. The site tour, the resources, the conversation, he finished. Thank you for that as well. It's been rare. They walked back to the entrance together, Lily chattering between them about the painting she'd seen. The carriage was already waiting. As Clara stepped up into it, Adrian caught her hand briefly. The Royal Institution lecture, he said quietly. Next month, will you be there? She should say no. Should put distance between them, between this strange, intense connection that scared her as much as it thrilled her. Should return to her safe, controlled world where feelings didn't complicate everything. Yes, she said instead. I'll be there. His fingers tightened on hers for just a moment, too brief to be improper, long enough to feel intentional. Then he released her and stepped back. The carriage rolled away. Clara watched through the window as the estate disappeared behind trees, Adrian's figure growing smaller until he vanished completely. That was not just about research, Lily said beside her. Clara closed her eyes. I know. So what are you going to do about it? I have absolutely no idea, but that wasn't entirely true. Because as London drew closer and her normal life reasserted itself, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not fear or resignation or the dull acceptance of her circumstances. Anticipation. Hope. The terrifying, exhilarating sense that her carefully controlled world was about to be upended completely. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she wanted to stop it. The weeks that followed felt like existing in two different worlds simultaneously. In one world, Clara maintained her routine. Greenhouse work, correspondence, the careful rhythms of botanical research. She photographed the historical text Adrian had given her, cross-referenced it with modern research, and began drafting a proposal for the mycorrhizal study. In the other world, she couldn't stop thinking about him. It was maddening. She'd catch herself in the middle of soil analysis, wondering what he was doing, whether he thought about her the way she thought about him, whether she'd imagined the intensity in his voice when he'd talked about speaking the same language. You're distracted again, her father observed one evening at dinner. Clara startled, nearly dropping her fork. I'm not. You've been cutting the same piece of chicken for 3 minutes, Robert Whitmore said mildly. Either you're distracted or you're conducting an unauthorized surgery at the dinner table. Lily giggled. Eleanor's expression turned calculating. Clara's been busy with her research proposal, Eleanor said. The one for the Duke's estate. Haven't you, dear? Yes, Clara said, grateful for the excuse. The methodology section is proving more complex than anticipated. You should send him a progress update, Eleanor continued in that too casual tone that meant she was scheming. Professional correspondence, keeping him informed of your work. I'm sure His Grace is quite busy with his own affairs. Nonsense. He specifically invited you to use his resources. He'd want to know how the project is developing. Clara recognized a maternal ambush when she saw one. Perhaps when I have something substantial to report. Or you could invite him to review your draft, Eleanor pressed. Get his input before you finalize it. Collaboration is how academic relationships develop. Mama, I'm simply saying that professional connections should be nurtured, particularly ones with such promising potential. Clara set down her fork carefully before she could bend it. There's nothing promising about it beyond potential research collaboration. Of course not, Eleanor agreed in a tone that agreed with nothing. Though Lady Ashford did mention at the shops yesterday that her son Nathaniel said the Duke has never shown such marked interest in anyone's work before. Apparently he rarely even attends lectures, yet he's attended 3 in the past month. Clara's heart skipped. 3? Nathaniel wondered if there was a particular reason for his sudden enthusiasm for botanical sciences. Perhaps he's genuinely interested in the subject, Clara said weakly. Perhaps, Eleanor smiled. Or perhaps the subject matter has become more personally engaging. Robert caught Clara's eye across the table, his expression sympathetic. He understood the pressure their mother's hopes placed on Clara's shoulders, the weight of expectation she carried. After dinner, he found her in the greenhouse. Your mother means well, he said, settling onto the workbench, even if her methods are not always subtle. She's building castles on foundations that don't exist, Clara said, more sharply than intended. The Duke and I barely know each other. Do you want to know him better? The question, asked so gently, nearly undid her. Clara set down the seedling she'd been transplanting. I don't know what I want, she admitted. He makes me feel things I don't know what to do with. What kind of things? Unsettled, aware, like I'm standing on the edge of something I can't see clearly. She turned to face her father. It's frightening. Love usually is. It's not love, it's just attraction, curiosity, the novelty of someone who seems to actually understand. She stopped, realizing she'd said too much. Robert studied her with the same careful attention he brought to diagnosing patients. Clara, you've spent years building walls around yourself, protecting yourself from exactly this kind of uncertainty, but walls that keep pain out also keep joy out. I'm not in pain. Aren't you? Clara looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Because he was right. She'd been in a low-grade pain for years, the ache of loneliness she refused to acknowledge, the grief of watching life pass by from behind glass walls, the slow resignation of accepting she'd never have what other women had. He's a duke, she said finally, and I'm nobody. Even if there was something between us, which there probably isn't, it could never— Your mother was a merchant's daughter, Robert interrupted. I was a country doctor's son studying medicine on scholarship. By society standards, we had no business marrying, but we did, because we chose each other over what we were supposed to do. That's different. Is it? Or are you looking for excuses because it's safer than risk? Clara had no answer for that. Her father squeezed her shoulder and left her alone with her plants and her increasingly complicated feelings. The Royal Institution lecture arrived with weather to match Clara's mood. Gray skies, threatened rain that never quite materialized, air heavy with humidity. She dressed carefully again, in a different practical dress that Lily immediately identified as her third nicest one. She didn't argue because arguing would admit her sister was right. Eleanor insisted on accompanying them, which Clara had expected. What she hadn't expected was the way her mother's presence made everything feel more official, more weighted with implication. Remember, Eleanor whispered as they entered the lecture hall, polite but not distant, engaged but not forward. Mama, this isn't a social call. Everything is a social call when a duke is involved. The hall was more crowded than the Kew lecture had been. The Royal Institution drew larger audiences. Clara found seats in the middle section, her eyes scanning the room for a tall, severe figure. He wasn't there. Disappointment hit harder than it should have. She told herself it was fine, that he'd probably had other obligations, that his attendance wasn't the point of being here. The lecture began. Dr. Mortimer, an expert in competitive exclusion theory, launched into his presentation with enthusiasm. Clara took notes automatically, her mind only half engaged. He wasn't coming. She'd been foolish to expect he would. Their conversation at the estate had probably been nothing more than polite interest from a man with too much time and too few intellectual challenges. She'd built it into something it wasn't because she was lonely and he'd paid attention to her. Halfway through the lecture, someone slid into the empty seat beside her. Clara turned, her heart leaping. Adrian looked windswept, slightly disheveled in a way she'd never seen him. His cravat was loose, his coat showed signs of travel dust. He'd clearly rushed to get here. "I apologize for the lateness," he murmured. "Estate business ran longer than anticipated." He'd come. He'd been delayed, but he'd come anyway, clearly rushing to make it. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "You didn't miss much. Dr. Mortimer is still on his introduction." "Then I'm in time for the actual content." His eyes met hers, and that same electric awareness sparked between them. "I'm glad." They turned their attention to the lecture, but Clara couldn't focus. She was too aware of him beside her, the way he leaned forward when a particularly interesting point was made, the barely audible sound he made when something struck him as flawed logic. At one point, when Dr. Mortimer made a claim about resource partitioning that was clearly oversimplified, Clara glanced over to find Adrian already looking at her with an expression that clearly said, "Are you hearing this?" She had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. When the lecture concluded and questions began, Adrian raised his hand. "Dr. Mortimer, you've discussed exclusion primarily in terms of direct competition for resources. But what about facilitation? There's growing evidence that some species actually enhance each other's survival through positive interactions. Doesn't that complicate the exclusion principle?" The room shifted. People craned their necks to see who'd asked the question. Several whispered to neighbors, clearly recognizing the Duke. Dr. Mortimer looked flustered. "Well, yes, facilitation is an interesting side topic, but the core principle, it's not a side topic if it fundamentally challenges the assumption that competition is always the driving force in community assembly," Clara heard herself say. Every head turned toward her now. She felt heat rise in her face but forced herself to continue. "There's recent research, showing that in harsh environments, facilitation can be more important than competition. The primrose populations on chalk downlands, for example, often show clustering patterns that suggest cooperative rather than competitive relationships." Dr. Mortimer's expression tightened. "I'm not familiar with that research." It's in the Journal of Botanical Sciences," Adrian said smoothly. "Whitmore's paper from last spring. The data is quite compelling." The room erupted in whispers. Eleanor's hand found Clara's arm and squeezed so tightly it hurt. Dr. Mortimer fumbled with his notes. "Well, I'll certainly review that work. Are there other questions?" The lecture concluded shortly after. As people filed out, several approached Adrian, colleagues seeking his attention, social climbers looking for introductions. He acknowledged them with curt politeness, but didn't engage. Instead, he turned to Clara. "That was well done," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have spoken up. That was terribly rude. It was honest. His framework was incomplete. Someone needed to say it." Something that might have been pride flickered across his face. "I'm glad it was you." "Your Grace." A woman materialized beside them. Lady Pemberton, of course. "How unexpected to see you here. And Miss Whitmore, too. What a coincidence." "Not a coincidence," Adrian said flatly. "We both have interest in the subject matter." Of course. Though I must say you two make quite the intellectual pair. The way you both challenged poor Dr. Mortimer, like a well-rehearsed performance." Clara wanted the floor to open and swallow her. "We simply had observations about the methodology." "Observations!" Lady Pemberton's laugh was sharp. "Is that what young people are calling courtship these days?" "Lady Pemberton." Adrian's voice dropped into something dangerous. "Miss Whitmore and I are professional colleagues. Nothing more. I'd appreciate it if you refrained from spreading inappropriate speculation." The woman's smile froze. "Of course, Your Grace. My apologies. I meant no offense." She fled. Adrian's jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. "I apologize," he said to Clara. "That was inevitable," Eleanor finished, materializing at Clara's other side. "Your Grace, I'm Eleanor Whitmore, Clara's mother. We're grateful for your interest in my daughter's work. The emphasis on work was subtle but unmistakable, a warning and an invitation simultaneously. Adrian inclined his head. Your daughter's research is exceptional, Mrs. Whitmore. It deserves attention. And it's receiving it, Eleanor said pleasantly. Though perhaps we should discuss the nature of that attention somewhere less public? Clara wanted to die. Mama, I'm sure His Grace has other obligations. Actually, Adrian said, his eyes never leaving Clara's face, I'd welcome the opportunity for further discussion. If you'd all join me for tea, my London residence is nearby. No. This was happening too fast. Clara needed time to think, to process, to figure out what she wanted before her mother started planning wedding dates. But Eleanor was already accepting, and Lily was bouncing with excitement, and Adrian was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read but felt in her bones. Clara, he said quietly, is that acceptable to you? He was asking permission, giving her the choice. She could say no, could end this before it spiraled further out of control. She should say no. Yes, she heard herself say. That would be acceptable. His expression shifted, relief, pleasure, something fiercer that made her pulse race. Then let's go, he said, and Clara felt the last of her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Adrian's London residence was nothing like Clara expected. She'd braced herself for oppressive grandeur, marble and gilt, and the kind of ostentatious wealth that made ordinary people feel like intruders. Instead, the townhouse was surprisingly understated. Elegant, yes, but lived in. Books stacked on side tables, papers scattered across a desk visible through an open door. The kind of comfortable disorder that suggested someone actually inhabited the space rather than just displayed it. A housekeeper appeared immediately, an older woman with kind eyes and the efficient manner of someone who'd been managing the household for decades. Mrs. Barrett, we'll take tea in the library, Adrian said, and perhaps some of those biscuits Cook made yesterday. Miss Lily looks like she appreciates good biscuits. Lily beamed at him. Eleanor's calculating expression softened slightly. He was good with children, that scored points in maternal arithmetic. The library was smaller than the one at the estate, but somehow more intimate. 2 walls of books, comfortable chairs arranged for actual conversation rather than formal display. Windows overlooking a private garden that was currently being battered by wind. Clara chose a chair near the window, needing the illusion of escape. Eleanor sat beside her like a guardian. Lily immediately gravitated toward the bookshelves, running her fingers along spines with reverent curiosity. Adrian remained standing, his posture rigid. He looked uncomfortable in a way Clara hadn't seen before. Not the controlled discomfort of social performance, but genuine uncertainty. Like he'd issued the invitation impulsively and was now regretting it. Your home is lovely, Eleanor said, breaking the awkward silence. Not at all what I expected. What did you expect? Adrian asked. More, formal, I suppose, more befitting your station. My station is an accident of birth. This is just where I live. He moved to pour whiskey from a decanter, then seemed to think better of it. Tea will be here shortly. Clara watched him carefully. Something was wrong. He was too controlled, too careful, like he was bracing for something unpleasant. Your Grace, Eleanor began, her voice taking on that particular tone Clara knew meant trouble. I hope you don't mind me speaking plainly. Mama, Clara warned. No, let her speak, Adrian said. He finally sat, choosing the chair across from them rather than beside. Distance. Deliberate distance. I prefer plainness to performance. Eleanor straightened her spine. Very well. My daughter is 26 years old, unmarried. Her prospects are, limited by society's standards. She's too intelligent, too independent, too focused on her work to appeal to conventional suitors. Mama, stop. She's also brilliant, Eleanor continued, ignoring Clara completely. Genuinely, remarkably brilliant. She deserves a partner who recognizes that, who values her mind as much as, if not more than, her other qualities. Adrian's expression revealed nothing. I agree. Then you'll understand why I need to ask directly. What are your intentions toward my daughter? The room went silent. Even Lily stopped her book browsing to stare. Clara felt her face burn. This is inappropriate. It's a fair question, Adrian said quietly. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, and something raw flickered across his face. My intentions are complicated. Complicated how? Eleanor pressed. Adrian stood abruptly, moving to the window. He stood with his back to them, shoulders tense. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I'm not good at this. At feelings, at relationships, at the kind of emotional vulnerability that normal people seem to navigate effortlessly. He turned back to face them. I've spent my entire life being told what I should want, who I should marry, what my role demands. And I've successfully avoided all of it because none of it felt real. None of it felt like anything I could actually sustain. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to stop him, wanted to tell him he didn't owe them explanations, but she also desperately needed to hear whatever he was about to say. Then I met Clara, Adrian continued, his eyes finding hers. And for the first time in my life, I wanted something that wasn't about duty or expectation or societal obligation. I wanted to talk to someone who understood what I was actually saying. I wanted to be around someone who didn't require me to pretend. That's not an answer about intentions, Eleanor said, though her voice had gentled slightly. Because I don't know what my intentions are, Adrian admitted. I know I think about her constantly. I know I manufacture excuses to see her. I know when she speaks at lectures, I feel proud in a way that makes no logical sense. But as for marriage, for courtship, for the traditional progression society demands, he stopped, shaking his head. I've never wanted that with anyone. I don't know if I'm capable of it. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. It wasn't disappointment exactly, more like recognition. He was being honest in a way that most men never were, stripping away the romantic pretense to reveal the complicated truth underneath. So you're asking my daughter to settle for intellectual companionship, Eleanor said sharply. To be satisfied with crumbs, while you avoid the commitment that would actually honor her. Mama! Clara stood, her hands shaking. That's enough. He doesn't owe us anything. We barely know each other. This entire conversation is premature and inappropriate. Is it? Eleanor turned to her daughter. Clara, look at yourself. You're glowing around him. You've smiled more in the past month than in the past 3 years. Don't tell me you don't feel something. What I feel is irrelevant if it's not mutual, Clara shot back. And even if it were, I'm not interested in being someone's experiment in normalcy. If Adrian can't give more than intellectual companionship, then that's all we'll have, and that's fine. It wasn't fine. The words tasted like ash, but she forced them out anyway because pride was all she had left. Adrian was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Clara, Mrs. Barrett entered her with tea, her timing either impeccable or catastrophic depending on perspective. She set the service down, glanced at the tense faces around the room, and retreated quickly. No one moved to pour. I should go, Clara said. This was a mistake. No. Adrian's voice cut through the room. Don't go. Please. Why? The question came out sharper than intended. So we can continue this humiliating interrogation. So my mother can extract promises you're not ready to make. So we can all pretend there's a future here when clearly, because I don't want you to leave angry, Adrian said. I don't want the last thing between us to be this conversation. Then what do you want it to be? He looked at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. Then he crossed to his desk, pulled out a drawer, and withdrew an envelope. This arrived yesterday, he said, holding it out to Clara. I've been trying to decide whether to show you. Clara took it with trembling fingers. The envelope was addressed to Adrian in handwriting she recognized immediately, Lily's enthusiastic scrawl. Her stomach dropped. What did she do? Open it. Clara broke the seal with growing dread. Inside was a letter, written in Lily's careful best handwriting. Your Grace, I know I already told you Clara should marry you at the garden party, but I wanted to tell you why, because I think you need to understand. Clara pretends she's happy being alone, but she's not. She cries sometimes when she thinks no one hears. She works in the greenhouse until late, because coming inside means sitting with Mama and Papa and watching them be in love and knowing she'll never have that. She tells me being alone is a choice, but it's not really. It's fear. She's afraid no one will want the real her, the one who cares more about roots than ribbons, who asks questions instead of giggling, who thinks marriage should be partnership, not performance. I think you're afraid too. You stand alone at parties. You look sad even when you're talking about things you like. You're careful about everything, like you're expecting people to hurt you. But when you look at Clara, you look different. And when she talks about you, her whole face changes even though she tries to hide it. Maybe you're both too scared to admit you want the same thing. Maybe you need someone to tell you it's okay to stop being afraid. So I'm telling you, it's okay. You're allowed to want things. Clara is allowed to want things. And maybe if you both stopped being so scared, you'd realize you want each other. Please don't tell Clara I wrote this. She'll be mad. But someone had to say it. Lily Whitmore. Clara finished reading, her vision blurring. She looked up to find Lily standing frozen by the bookshelf, her face pale with dawning realization. You weren't supposed to show her, Lily whispered. I wasn't sure I would, Adrian said. His voice was gentle. But your mother asked about intentions, and this letter, it says things I haven't been able to say myself. Clara reread it, her hands shaking. Every word felt like being flayed open, her carefully hidden loneliness exposed for everyone to see. Is it true? Eleanor asked quietly. Do you cry, Clara? No. The lie was automatic, then quieter. Sometimes. Not often. Why didn't you tell me? Because you do exactly what you're doing now. See it as a problem that needs fixing through marriage. But I'm not broken, Mama. I'm just... She stopped, unable to finish. Lonely, Adrian finished. His voice was rough. You're lonely. So am I. Clara met his eyes across the room, and something passed between them. Raw recognition, mutual understanding, the kind of truth that hurt to acknowledge. I received the letter yesterday, Adrian continued. I've read it probably 30 times, and each time I convince myself it's wishful thinking from a well-meaning child, that Clara couldn't possibly feel what Lily described, that I'm projecting my own desires onto ambiguous signals. They're not ambiguous, Clara heard herself say. I think about you constantly. I manufacture reasons to be where you might be. When you defend my research or challenge my thinking, I feel seen in a way I've never experienced. She took a shaking breath. And it terrifies me because I don't know what to do with it. Eleanor made a small sound, triumph, relief, maternal satisfaction. But Clara kept her eyes on Adrian. I told your mother I don't know if I'm capable of traditional courtship, he said. And that's true. I don't know how to be romantic or emotionally demonstrative. I don't know if I can give you what a normal relationship requires. I don't want normal, Clara said. I want real. What does real look like for you? She thought about it, trying to articulate something she'd never put into words. Partnership. Intellectual equals who challenge each other. Someone who doesn't require me to be less than I am, who doesn't expect me to perform femininity according to society's script. She paused. Someone who makes me feel less alone without demanding I become someone else. Adrian moved closer, slowly, like approaching something that might bolt. And if I could offer that, partnership, intellectual engagement, presence without performance, but couldn't guarantee the romantic love that novels promise, then we'd figure it out as we went, Clara said. We're researchers. We test hypotheses, adjust methodology, iterate based on results. Why can't we apply the same approach to this? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You're proposing we experiment with courtship? I'm proposing we stop being terrified of wanting something and see what happens when we actually try. The silence that followed felt different than before, not tense, but charged with possibility. Eleanor cleared her throat. So, courtship then? Official courtship? Adrian looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. She nodded, her heart hammering. Yes, he said. If Clara is willing, I'm willing. The words felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. Lily launched herself at Clara, wrapping skinny arms around her waist. I'm sorry I sent the letter. I just wanted to help. Clara hugged her sister back, her throat tight. I know, Mouse. It's okay. Is it, though? Lily pulled back, looking between Clara and Adrian. Are you both actually going to try, or are you going to keep being careful and scared? Out of the mouths of children. Clara looked at Adrian, saw her own uncertainty reflected in his face. We'll try, she said firmly. Really try. Not just intellectual companionship masquerading as courtship. Agreed, Adrian said. He moved closer, close enough that Clara could see the faint freckles across his nose she'd never noticed before. I don't know how to do this well, but I'd like to do it with you. It wasn't poetry, wasn't a grand romantic declaration, but it was honest and real and exactly what Clara needed to hear. Eleanor stood, gathering her reticule. Well then, we should leave you two to discuss parameters. Clara, we'll expect you home by 6. Mama, it's barely 6 o'clock, Eleanor repeated firmly. She fixed Adrian with a meaningful look. And your Grace, I'm trusting you to honor my daughter. Don't make me regret that trust. You have my word, Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor shepherded Lily toward the door despite the girl's protests. But I want to hear 6 o'clock, Lily. That gives them 3 hours, which is more than enough time for an initial conversation. They left, taking their whirlwind energy with them. The library felt suddenly enormous, the silence deafening. Clara and Adrian stared at each other. That was, Clara started. Intense, like, Adrian finished. Your family is intense. They mean well. I know. He gestured toward the chairs. Should we sit? Actually discuss this? They sat, both perched on the edge of their seats like they might need to flee at any moment. The tea had gone cold, but neither reached for it. I should probably start by asking what you want from courtship, Adrian said, what your expectations are. Clara twisted her hands in her lap. Honesty. No performance, no pretending to be something we're not. If you're uncomfortable or uncertain, I want you to tell me. If I'm pushing too hard or expecting too much, you say so. What about society? They'll have expectations, rules about propriety, progression, timeline. Let them have expectations, Clara said with more confidence than she felt. We're not courting for society's benefit. We're doing this for ourselves. Adrian's expression shifted. Surprise, then something that might have been admiration. You realize that attitude will make you even more of a target for gossip? I've been a target my entire adult life. At least now I'll have a reason. He laughed, an actual laugh, short but genuine. Fair point. He sobered, his fingers drumming against the chair arm. I need you to understand something about me, about my family. Clara waited, sensing this was important. My parents' marriage was... He stopped, choosing words carefully. Functional but cold. They fulfilled their duties, produced an heir, maintained appearances. But there was no warmth between them, no affection. When my mother died, my father seemed relieved, like he'd been released from an obligation he'd never wanted. I'm sorry, Clara said softly. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because it shaped how I understand marriage. As a transaction, a social contract with specific terms and conditions, not as something that involves feelings or connection or... He gestured vaguely. Whatever it is people claim to feel when they're in love. So you don't believe in love? I don't know if I believe in the kind of love that's expected. The overwhelming passion, the constant need for proximity, the way people describe being unable to imagine life without the other person. His gray eyes met hers. But I do believe in choosing someone, deciding they matter enough to build something with, even if it doesn't look like what everyone else has. Clara absorbed that, turning it over in her mind. I can work with that. Can you? He leaned forward. Because you deserve someone who can give you the whole romantic fantasy. Someone who'll write you poetry and bring you flowers and declare undying devotion. I hate poetry. Flowers die, and undying devotion sounds exhausting. She matched his lean, bringing them closer. What I want is someone who respects my work, challenges my thinking, and doesn't expect me to be anyone other than who I am. If that person also happens to make my pulse race and my thoughts scatter, well, that's just biology. A slow smile spread across Adrian's face, genuine, unguarded, transforming his entire appearance. Just biology? Mostly biology. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, though there might be some psychological component I haven't fully analyzed. We could study it empirically, gather data on physiological responses under various conditions. That's a terrible idea. Terrible or fascinating? Both, Clara admitted. Definitely both. They sat there grinning at each other like fools, and Clara felt something inside her chest unfurl, something that had been clenched tight for years, finally relaxing. So, Adrian said eventually, practical matters. How do we actually conduct this courtship? I assume there are protocols, so there are. But as you said, we're not courting for society's benefit. He stood, moving to his desk. I propose we establish our own protocols, guidelines that make sense for who we are rather than who we're supposed to be. Clara joined him at the desk. Like what? Adrian pulled out paper and a pen. First, frequency of contact. Traditional courtship requires supervised visits, restricted duration, limited topics of conversation, all designed to prevent any actual intimacy or understanding from developing. Sounds counterproductive. It is. So, what do we want instead? Clara thought about it. Regular meetings. Substantial time together, not just 30-minute drawing room visits. An actual conversation, not weather commentary and social niceties. Agreed. Adrian wrote it down. What about chaperonage? Required in public settings to avoid scandal, but Clara hesitated, then pushed forward. Could we sometimes meet here in the library or conservatory, somewhere we could actually work together without audience? You'd be risking your reputation. My reputation is already questionable. Spinster botanist who prioritizes plants over propriety. Adding spent unchaperoned time with a duke might actually improve things. Adrian's laugh was darker this time. Or destroy you completely. Then I'll be destroyed doing something I chose rather than something forced on me by society's stupid rules. Clara met his eyes steadily. I'm willing to take that risk if you are. Something shifted in his expression, heat, intensity, the carefully controlled facade cracking to reveal what lay beneath. I'm willing. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Clara was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how his height meant she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, how improper this entire situation was. What else? She asked, her voice rougher than intended. Adrian looked back at the paper, but his focus seemed scattered. Physical contact. Traditional rules are very strict. No touching beyond hand-holding, and even that only in specific circumstances. What do you want? The question came out barely above a whisper. He set down the pen carefully, like it might explode. I want... He stopped, jaw clenching. I don't know what I want. I've never wanted to touch anyone before, not really, but with you... He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. His fingers brushed her cheek, feather light, barely there. Claire's breath caught. Is this all right? He asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His hand cupped her face properly now, thumb tracing along her cheekbone. His skin was warm, slightly rough. Clara leaned into the touch without thinking, her eyes fluttering closed. Biology? He murmured. Shut up. She felt his smile more than saw it. Then his hand dropped away, and the loss of contact felt almost physical. We should probably establish actual boundaries, he said, his voice unsteady. Before we what? Before I do something inadvisable. Clara opened her eyes to find him staring at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. What would you consider inadvisable? This. He closed the distance between them in one step, his hands framing her face, his forehead coming to rest against hers. This is inadvisable. We barely know each other. We've agreed to courtship less than an hour ago. I should be respecting your virtue and maintaining proper distance. And instead, I want to kiss you so badly I can barely think straight. Clara's heart felt like it might beat out of her chest. That's inadvisable, I know. I was going to say mutual. Adrian pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Clara, if you're going to tell me all the reasons we shouldn't, save your breath. I know them all. I've recited them to myself 100 times. She reached up, her hands covering his where they still cupped her face. But I'm tired of logic overriding everything else. I'm tired of being careful. So what do you want? I want you to stop thinking for 30 seconds and just... He kissed her. It wasn't graceful or practiced. His nose bumped hers, their teeth clicked briefly, the angle was wrong. But then they adjusted, and his lips were softer than expected, and his hands slid into her hair, carefully, so carefully, and Clara forgot every reason this was a terrible idea. She'd been kissed before, once, years ago, by a boy at university who'd thought intellectual women were exotic novelties. That kiss had been wet and invasive and entirely unpleasant. This was nothing like that. This was... She couldn't think. Couldn't catalog or analyze or maintain any of her usual protective distance. There was just the taste of him, the solid warmth of his body, the way his hands trembled slightly against her scalp like he was afraid she'd disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Claire's first coherent thought was that they'd just violated about 17 rules of propriety, and she didn't care even slightly. That was, Adrian started. Inadvisable, Clara finished. Completely inadvisable. Are you sorry? She looked up at him, his hair disheveled where her fingers had threaded through it, his lips slightly swollen, his usually controlled expression utterly wrecked, and felt something fierce and possessive surge through her chest. Not even a little bit. He kissed her again, slower this time, more deliberate. Clara let herself sink into it, let herself want without analyzing, let herself feel without fear. A clock chimed somewhere in the house. Once, twice, 3 times. Clara pulled back. What time is it? Adrian glanced at the mantel clock, his expression dazed. 5:30. I need to go. Mama said 6 o'clock. Right. Yes. 6 o'clock. He didn't release her, his hand still cradling her face like she was something precious. Adrian? I know. He finally stepped back, running a hand through his hair. I know. We're moving too fast. Or exactly fast enough, Clara countered. We're adults. We've agreed to courtship. There's no rule that says we have to take years to figure out what we want. Society would disagree. Society can go hang. Clara straightened her dress, tried to repair her hair. Are you regretting this? No. The answer was immediate, emphatic. Are you? No. They stood there, disheveled and uncertain and unable to stop looking at each other. I should walk you out, Adrian said finally. Probably. Neither of them moved. Then Adrian laughed, genuine and free and nothing like his usual controlled demeanor. We're terrible at this. Spectacularly terrible, Clara agreed. She forced herself toward the door. Tomorrow? You want to see me tomorrow? Unless you have objections? None whatsoever. Where? Clara thought quickly. Kew Gardens? 2 o'clock? We can walk, talk, maintain plausible deniability that it's anything other than two colleagues discussing research. Clara? She turned in the doorway. I'm glad Lily wrote that letter, he said quietly. Her throat tightened. So am I. The carriage ride home passed in a blur. Clara touched her lips repeatedly, still feeling the ghost of pressure there, unable to quite believe what had happened. She'd kissed Adrian Blackthorne. She'd kissed him, and he'd kissed her back. And it had been, You kissed him, Lily whispered from beside her, eyes wide. Clara jumped. I did not. Your hair's messed up, your lips are red, and you keep touching your mouth. Lily's grin was smug. You absolutely kissed him. If you tell Mama. I won't tell Mama. Lily's expression turned serious. But Clara? Be careful. I know I pushed you toward him, but... She stopped, struggling with words. He's a duke. You're you. If this goes badly, then it goes badly, Clara interrupted. And I'll survive. I've survived worse. Have you, though? The question hung between them as the carriage pulled up to their house. Clara had no answer because Lily was right. She'd spent years protecting herself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. And now she'd just thrown all those protections away for one impulsive, inadvisable, absolutely perfect kiss. Eleanor met them at the door, her face carefully neutral. Did you have a productive conversation? Very productive, Clara said. And what was decided? Clara met her mother's eyes steadily. We're courting, officially, by our own rules, not society's. Eleanor's face cycled through several emotions, triumph, concern, maternal calculation. Clara, you can't just ignore propriety. I can. I will. If this is going to work, it has to be real, not performance. Clara moved toward the stairs. I'm going to the greenhouse. Please don't follow me. She escaped before her mother could protest, practically running to her sanctuary. Once inside, surrounded by her plants and the familiar smell of earth and growth, she finally let herself process what had happened. She'd done it. After years of careful control, of protecting herself from risk, she'd thrown caution aside and chosen something terrifying and uncertain. She'd chosen Adrian. The question now was whether she'd just made the best decision of her life or destroyed everything in pursuit of something that could never work. Only time would tell. Clara pulled out the historical text Adrian had given her, running her fingers over the worn cover. Inside the front page, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A pressed flower, carefully preserved between sheets of protective paper. A primrose. He'd put it there, either before giving her the book or after. She couldn't tell. But the gesture was unmistakable, deliberate. She touched the fragile petals and felt tears prick her eyes for reasons she couldn't entirely name. This was going to hurt eventually. Something this intense, this fast, this unlikely. It had to implode. The universe didn't allow spinster botanists to find happiness with dukes. That wasn't how the world worked. But for now, for this moment, she let herself hope anyway. The next morning, a note arrived with breakfast. Clara recognized the handwriting immediately. Her hand shook as she opened it. Clara, I spent most of last night convincing myself yesterday was a fever dream. That I'd imagined the entire conversation, the kiss, the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Then I remembered your hair coming undone, The way you looked at me like I wasn't completely insane. The taste of tea on your lips. Real. It was real. I'll see you at 2 o'clock. I'm already counting the hours. A. Clara pressed the note to her chest, her heart doing complicated things. Across the table, Lily watched with knowing eyes. You're in so much trouble. I know, Clara whispered, but she smiled anyway. Kew Gardens. At 2 o'clock was busy. Too busy for the kind of private conversation Clara craved. Families strolled through the palm house, artists sketched by the ponds. Elderly couples fed swans. She found Adrian near the temperate house, standing alone despite the crowds, looking severe and out of place in his formal attire. His face transformed when he saw her, the careful mask dropping to reveal something raw and unguarded. You came, he said. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought I might have dreamed yesterday, that I'd wake up and discover none of it was real. Clara moved closer, propriety be damned. It was real. They walked together through the gardens, maintaining the appearance of proper distance while their hands occasionally brushed, accidental contact that felt anything but accidental. I have a confession, Adrian said as they paused near a bed of experimental rose cultivars. I'm terrible at courtship, at romance, at all the things I'm supposed to be doing to properly woo you. Then don't do them, Clara said. Do what feels authentic instead. What feels authentic is wanting to spend every moment with you, which society would consider inappropriate and obsessive. Society has terrible opinions about most things. Clara. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. I need you to understand something. Yesterday, when I said, I don't know if I'm capable of the kind of love people expect, I meant it. I may never be the kind of partner who expresses feelings easily or makes grand romantic gestures. And I may never be the kind of wife who manages households perfectly or looks beautiful at parties, Clara countered. We're both deficient by society's standards, so what? So I don't want to fail you. To promise something I can't deliver. Clara looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the fear beneath the control, the vulnerability he worked so hard to mask, recognized it because she felt it too. Then don't promise anything, she said. Just be here. Be honest. Try. That's all I'm asking. The relief that crossed his face was almost painful to witness. I can do that. Good. She reached for his hand. Social rules be damned. Then stop overthinking and just... Clara Whitmore, is that you? They jumped apart like guilty children. Clara turned to find Nathaniel Ashford approaching, his golden hair catching sunlight, his smile charming and utterly unwelcome. Lord Ashford, Clara said stiffly, please call me Nathaniel. Any friend of Adrian's? He stopped, his eyes moving between them. Though I'm starting to wonder if friend is really the appropriate term. We're courting, Adrian said flatly. Officially. Nathaniel's eyebrows shot up. Are you now? How delightfully unexpected. Adrian, you dark horse. I never thought I'd see the day you'd... Nathaniel, Adrian's voice held warning. What do you want? Just happened to be taking a constitutional. Saw you from across the way and thought I'd say hello. His expression turned more serious. Though I should probably mention, Lady Pemberton was also in the gardens earlier, and she has remarkably good eyesight for a woman of her age. Clara's stomach dropped. How much did she see? Enough to fuel speculation for the next month, I'd wager. Nathaniel's tone was sympathetic. You two should be more careful. The gossip mills are already grinding over your lecture appearances together. If people think there's actual impropriety, there isn't, Clara said quickly. Isn't there? Nathaniel glanced at their still-connected hands. Because from where I'm standing, it looks rather improper. Adrian's jaw clenched. Thank you for the warning. Was there anything else? Just... Nathaniel hesitated, then continued more quietly. Just be careful, both of you. Society can be vicious, especially toward women who step outside expected boundaries. And Clara, with all due respect, you don't have the social armor to withstand a real scandal. He left them standing there, the warning hanging in the air like smoke. He's right, Clara said quietly. We're being reckless. Should we stop? She thought about it. Really thought about going back to her safe, controlled life. To greenhouses and loneliness and the slow ache of wanting something she could never have. No, she said firmly, but we should be smarter, more careful. I'm sorry, Adrian said. This is my fault. I should have been more... Our fault, Clara interrupted. We're in this together, remember? They continued walking, maintaining proper distance now, hyper-aware of potential observers. The rest of the afternoon passed in stolen glances and careful conversation, everything they wanted to say hanging unspoken between them. When Clara finally returned home, exhausted from the tension of constant vigilance, she found her mother waiting in the sitting room. "We need to talk," Eleanor said. Clara's heart sank. "If this is about the courtship, it's about the rumors." Eleanor's face was pale. "I had tea with Lady Hartwell this afternoon. According to her, according to everyone, you and the Duke have been conducting a scandalously inappropriate relationship. Secret meetings, unchaperoned visits, public displays of affection. That's not true. We've been careful. Have you?" Eleanor stood agitated. "Because Lady Pemberton is telling anyone who'll listen that she witnessed you holding hands in Kew Gardens. Holding hands, Clara. We barely touched. It doesn't matter what actually happened. It matters what people think happened." Eleanor's voice rose. "Your reputation is already fragile. If society decides you're compromised, no amount of truth will save you." Clara felt cold spread through her chest. "So what are you saying? That I should end the courtship?" "I'm saying you need to be more careful, that you need to follow the rules, at least publicly, or this will destroy you." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "I want you to be happy, but I also want you to survive. And right now you're risking everything for something that might not last," Clara finished bitterly. "Might not be real? Is that what you were going to say?" "I was going to say, might not be worth the cost." The words hung between them like a verdict. Clara climbed the stairs to her room, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, she found a small package on her bed, delivered sometime during the afternoon. Inside was a book, another historical botanical text, this one on mycorrhizal associations in various soil types. And tucked between the pages, another pressed flower. This time, it was a lily. Clara sank onto her bed, clutching the book, and let herself cry. Because her mother was right. The cost was mounting, and she had no idea if what they were building together was strong enough to survive the weight of society's judgment. But she also knew she couldn't stop now. Not when she'd finally found someone who made her feel less alone. Not when she'd finally chosen something for herself instead of accepting what she was told she deserved. The question was whether that choice would ultimately free her or destroy her completely. She didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Clara lay in bed staring at the ceiling, turning her mother's words over and over like stones in her palm. Might not be worth the cost, as if love, or whatever this was, could be measured against social standing like items on a ledger. By dawn, she'd made a decision, not the safe one, not the one her mother wanted. She dressed before the household stirred, grabbed her field notebook and specimen bag, and slipped out to the greenhouse. Her hands moved automatically through morning routines, checking moisture levels, rotating pots toward the light, noting new growth. Physical tasks that required no thought, leaving her mind free to work through the real problem. Society wanted her to choose, Adrian or respectability. But that was a false choice, designed to force women into boxes they'd never fit. What if she refused both options? What if she built something entirely different? The idea took shape slowly, piece by piece, like a plant emerging from soil. She was still working through the logistics when Lily appeared in the doorway, her hair uncombed, still in her nightgown. "You're up early," Lily said. "Couldn't sleep. Because of what Mama said?" Lily climbed onto the workbench, drawing her knees to her chest. "Are you going to stop seeing him?" "No." The certainty in Clara's voice surprised even her. "But I'm going to do this differently, smarter." "How?" Clara set down her watering can and turned to face her sister. "What if instead of hiding our relationship or conforming to society's rules, we made it impossible for them to dismiss us?" "I don't understand. The gossip, the whispers, the judgment, it all comes from people thinking I'm trying to climb above my station, that I'm some opportunistic woman ensnaring a duke." Clara's mind raced ahead, possibilities multiplying. But what if I prove that's not what this is? What if I demonstrate that I have value independent of his interest? Lily's eyes widened. "The research. You're going to publish the mycorrhizal study. Not just publish. I'm going to present it at the Royal Society." Clara felt her pulse quicken with something between terror and excitement. Women can't be members, but they can be invited to present if their work is substantial enough. If I can make this research undeniable, if I can prove I belong in those spaces on my own merit, then people can't say you're just using Adrian for status, Lily finished, because you'll have your own. Exactly. Clara grabbed her notebook, already sketching out a timeline. "But I need to move fast. The field work has to happen now before autumn. That means spending significant time at the estate, which will fuel more gossip. But if the final product is strong enough, if the work speaks for itself, it won't matter what they said before, Lily said, because the proof will be right there. Clara looked at her 8-year-old sister and felt a surge of fierce love. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You've just been too busy with plants to notice. Despite everything, Clara laughed. Then she sobered, reality crashing back. This is risky, Mouse. If the research doesn't pan out, or if I can't get the Royal Society to take me seriously, I'll have destroyed my reputation for nothing. But if you pull it off? If I pull it off, I prove that I'm not just the Duke's eccentric botanist girlfriend. I'm a researcher who deserves to be taken seriously. Clara closed her notebook with a decisive snap. And maybe that'll be enough to make society reconsider their assumptions. What does Adrian think? Good question. Clara hadn't told him yet, hadn't formulated the plan clearly enough to articulate. I'll find out today. She sent a note to Adrian's London residence requesting a meeting. His response came within the hour. My library, noon. Come alone if you can. Clara dressed carefully, practical clothing, nothing that could be misconstrued as trying to attract attention. She told her mother she was visiting a colleague to discuss research, which was technically true even if incomplete. The walk to Adrian's townhouse felt longer than usual. Clara's mind spun through possible conversations, ways to explain her plan that didn't sound completely insane. Mrs. Barrett opened the door before Clara could knock, her expression knowing. He's been pacing the library since your note arrived, miss. Practically wore a groove in the carpet. Clara found him exactly as described, moving restlessly between bookshelves, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. He stopped when he saw her, relief flooding his face. Clara, I was beginning to think... He cut himself off. I'm glad you came. We need to talk. She closed the door behind her, propriety be damned. About what happens next. Adrian's expression shuddered slightly. If this is about yesterday, about Nathaniel's warning, it's about everything. Clara moved to the center of the room, needing to pace as she spoke. The gossip, the whispers, the way society is already trying to destroy this before it even begins. We can keep being careful, keep following the rules, and they'll still find ways to tear us apart. Or... Adrian's voice was careful, controlled. Or we change the game entirely. She laid out her plan in detail. The research proposal, the timeline, the end goal of Royal Society presentation. Adrian listened without interrupting, his face impossible to read. When she finished, silence stretched between them. You'd be risking everything, he said finally. Your reputation, your family's standing, any chance at a conventional life. I don't want a conventional life. I want one that means something. And if the research fails, if the Royal Society refuses to hear you, Clara lifted her chin, then I'll have failed trying to build something real rather than succeeding at pretending to be someone I'm not. Adrian moved closer, his eyes searching her face. This is because of what your mother said, because of the gossip. This is because I'm tired of living according to other people's limitations. Clara held his gaze steadily. I'm 26 years old. I've spent my entire adult life making myself smaller, safer, less threatening to society's expectations. And I'm done. With or without you, I'm done. With or without me. His voice dropped, something raw entering it. I want you, Clara said, the words costing her but needing to be said. I want this, whatever this is between us. But I won't sacrifice myself to have it. I won't become some diminished version of myself just to make our relationship acceptable to people whose opinions shouldn't matter. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, emotions playing across his face too quickly to catalog. Then something shifted, decision crystallizing into action. The estate is yours, he said. Full access to any area you need, staff support for excavation, whatever resources are required. Thomas can coordinate the fieldwork teams. I'll write to the Royal Society on your behalf. No. Clara cut him off. No aristocratic influence. No using your name to open doors for me. If this works, it has to be because the research stands on its own merit. That's... Adrian stopped, frustration flickering across his face. Clara, that's unnecessarily difficult. I have connections, influence that could undermine everything I'm trying to prove, Clara finished. Don't you see? If you smooth the path, if you use your position to advance my work, then I'm right back where I started, succeeding because of a man, not because of my own abilities. That's not how I meant it. I know, But it's how it would be perceived. Clara moved closer to him, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. I need to do this myself. It's the only way it means anything. Adrian's jaw clenched, his hands fisting at his sides. You're asking me to watch you struggle when I have the power to help. That's what partnership looks like, Clara interrupted. Not one person carrying the other, both people supporting each other while respecting boundaries, even when those boundaries are unnecessarily harsh. Especially then. They stared at each other, the tension between them different than before. Not sexual, not romantic, but the friction of two strong wills colliding over fundamental questions of autonomy and assistance. This is new for me, Adrian said finally, his voice rough. Wanting to help someone, caring whether they succeed or fail. I don't know how to do it without trying to control the situation. Then learn. Clara softened her tone slightly. I'm not asking you to stop caring. I'm asking you to care in a way that respects who I am. And who are you? Someone who needs to know she's capable of standing on her own merit. Someone who can't build a life on borrowed influence. Clara paused, trying to articulate something she'd only half understood herself. If I let you open doors for me now, I'll never know if I could have opened them myself. And that uncertainty will poison everything between us. Adrian absorbed that, his expression gradually shifting from frustration to something like understanding. So you're going to work yourself to exhaustion doing everything the hard way just to prove a point? Yes. And I'm supposed to stand by and watch? You're supposed to be here when I need you, to listen when I need to talk through problems, to believe in me when I doubt myself. Clara finally closed the remaining distance, her hands finding his. That's harder than using your influence to solve problems for me, but it's what I need. His fingers tightened around hers. I'll try. But Clara, I'm not good at this, at holding back when I see solutions. I know. We'll figure it out together. The tension between them gradually eased. Adrian pulled her closer, his forehead coming to rest against hers, a gesture that was becoming familiar, comforting in its intimacy without demanding more than either was ready to give. When do you start? He asked. Tomorrow. I need to finalize the proposal today, then begin excavation planning with Thomas. That's fast? It has to be. If I'm going to present at the Royal Society's autumn session, I need complete data by September. That's 4 months for field work that would normally take a year. Adrian pulled back to look at her. That's impossible. Probably, but I'm going to try anyway. Something that might have been admiration crossed his face. You're remarkable. Completely mad, but remarkable. Is that your way of saying you support this? It's my way of saying I'm terrified for you and in awe of you in equal measure. He kissed her forehead, gentle and brief. When do I see you again? I don't know. This work, it's going to consume everything. I'll be at your estate more than in London, spending dawn to dusk in muddy fields digging up roots. Not exactly romantic courtship material. I don't want romantic courtship material. I want you. Adrian's voice was fierce. Covered in mud, obsessed with fungal networks, too exhausted to make conversation. I want all of it. Clara felt something in her chest crack open. Even if it means months of barely seeing each other, even then. He hesitated, then continued more quietly. Though I should probably mention, I'll be at the estate too. I have business there, accounts to review, repairs to oversee. Entirely coincidental that my schedule suddenly requires extended residence. Despite everything, Clara smiled. Entirely coincidental. We'll be too busy to see much of each other, professional colleagues working on separate projects that happen to share geography. Of course, but perhaps the occasional dinner, comparing notes on our respective work? That would be appropriate, Clara agreed, her smile widening. Purely professional. Purely, Adrian echoed. Then he kissed her properly, and there was nothing professional about it. The next 4 weeks blurred together in a haze of physical labor and mental exhaustion. Clara rose before dawn, worked until her hands bled, and collapsed into bed too tired to dream. Thomas and his team excavated carefully under her direction, removing soil layer by layer, exposing root systems with painstaking precision. The work was backbreaking. Clara developed calluses, strained muscles she didn't know she had, and gained a permanent layer of dirt under her fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove. She'd never been happier. The data was extraordinary. The primrose roots showed extensive mycorrhizal colonization, exactly as she'd hypothesized. But more than that, the patterns revealed something unexpected. The fungal networks connected different primrose populations, creating a kind of underground communication system, Plants that should have been competing were actually sharing resources through their fungal partners. It was groundbreaking, revolutionary, exactly the kind of discovery that could make or break a career. Adrian kept his distance during the day, letting her work without interference. But most evenings he appeared at the excavation site around dusk, bringing food and water and quiet company. He never asked about the research, respecting her need to work through problems independently. But he listened when she needed to verbalize her thinking. "The colonization density is higher than any previous study I've read," Clara said one evening, too excited to eat despite her exhaustion. They were sitting at the edge of the excavation pit, watching the sun set over the downland. "And the network structure. It's not random. There's organization, purpose. The fungus is actively facilitating resource sharing between plant." "What does that mean for your hypothesis about competition?" Adrian asked. "It means I might have to rewrite it entirely. Competition isn't the primary driver in these populations. Cooperation is. The plants that survive best aren't the ones that fight hardest, but the ones that connect most effectively." She turned to look at him, struck by the parallel. "Does that sound familiar?" Adrian's mouth quirked. "Are you comparing us to fungally networked primroses?" "Maybe." Clara felt giddy with exhaustion and discovery. "We're both better connected than isolated, both stronger working together than fighting alone." "That's possibly the strangest romantic comparison I've ever heard. I'm a botanist. What did you expect? Poetry about roses?" "I expected nothing less than fungal metaphors." Adrian's expression sobered slightly. "You look exhausted." "I am exhausted. Also exhilarated. Also terrified this won't be enough." "It will be. You can't know that. I know that what you're doing here is extraordinary. I know that any organization that fails to recognize that is staffed by idiots." He reached over, brushing dirt off her cheek with surprising gentleness. "And I know that regardless of what happens with the Royal Society, you're proving exactly what you set out to prove." Clara leaned into his touch, too tired to maintain distance. "Which is? That you're brilliant on your own merit. That you don't need anyone's name or influence to create something meaningful." He paused. "That you were always enough, with or without me." The words hit harder than expected. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, exhaustion making her emotional, or maybe just the relief of being seen so clearly. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. "Even though I said I needed to do this alone, I'm glad you're here. Where else would I be?" They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the downland. Thomas's team had long since departed. The estate house glowed with lamplight in the distance. For a moment, the world was just the two of them and the quiet earth. "Clara," Adrian's voice was hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you about next week." Clara felt her stomach tighten. "What about next week?" "There's a formal dinner at the Ashford estate. Nathaniel's father is hosting, and I'm expected to attend." He paused. "You're invited as well." "As my—" He stopped, searching for the right word. "As your what?" Clara's voice came out sharper than intended. "Your colleague, your research partner, your scandalous courtship partner whom everyone is whispering about?" "As the woman I'm courting," Adrian said firmly, openly, officially. Clara's pulse raced. Adrian, that's essentially a public declaration. At a formal society dinner, the gossip will be unavoidable either way," he interrupted. "We can hide and let people speculate, or we can be honest and face the consequences directly. I'm tired of hiding." "Easy for you to say. You're a duke. I'm the woman who's revolutionizing botanical understanding of plant cooperation through meticulous field research," Adrian cut in. "The woman who's too brilliant and too stubborn to let society's stupid rules define her worth. That's who you are, Clara. That's who I want standing beside me at that dinner." Clara wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. But she was also tired, so tired, of being careful. "All right," she heard herself say. "I'll go." Adrian's relief was visible. "I'll send a carriage. I'll arrange my own transportation. And I'll wear what I choose, not what's expected. If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly. I wouldn't want it any other way." The following week, Clara stood in front of her wardrobe trying to decide what honest looked like in formal dress. Every gown felt like a costume, a lie about who she really was. "Wear the green one," Lily said from her doorway. "The dark green. It's practical but pretty. It's you." Clara pulled out the dress. Simple lines, no excessive ornamentation, the color of forest shadows. "This is barely acceptable for a formal dinner." "So?" You're barely acceptable by society's standards anyway. Might as well be comfortable while they judge you. Despite her nerves, Clara laughed. Excellent logic, Mouse. She dressed with Eleanor's help, her mother's hands gentle as she arranged Clara's hair. They didn't speak. There was too much that needed saying, and no good words to say it. But the silence felt companionable rather than tense. You look beautiful, Eleanor said finally. But more importantly, you look like yourself. Clara met her mother's eyes in the mirror. Are you still convinced this is a mistake? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. I'm convinced it's dangerous. But I'm also starting to think it might be exactly what you need, what you've always needed, someone who lets you be entirely yourself without apology. Even if it destroys my reputation? Even then, Eleanor squeezed Clara's shoulders. Though I reserve the right to say I told you so if this ends badly. I wouldn't expect anything less. The Ashford estate was ablaze with light when Clara arrived, her stomach churning with nerves. Carriages lined the drive. Seemingly half of London society had turned out for this dinner, because word had spread, obviously. The eccentric botanist and the reclusive Duke appearing together publicly. It was too delicious for people to resist. Clara almost turned around. Almost told her driver to take her home, to forget this entire insane idea. Then she saw Adrian standing at the entrance, scanning arriving guests with barely concealed tension. When his eyes found her carriage, his entire body relaxed. He was waiting for her. Had probably been waiting since the first guests arrived, watching for her specifically. Clara stepped down from the carriage, her legs unsteady. Adrian moved to meet her, offering his arm with a formality that somehow felt more intimate than casual touch. You came, he said quietly. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might be smarter than me and avoid this spectacle entirely. Apparently I'm exactly as foolish as you are. His mouth quirked in that almost smile she was learning to read. Shall we face the wolves together? Together, Clara agreed. They entered arm in arm, and Clara felt every eye in the room turned toward them. The whispers started immediately, a susurrus of scandal that followed them like a wake. Nathaniel appeared almost instantly, his expression concerned. Adrian, Miss Whitmore, I'm so glad you could attend. The emphasis on attend suggested he'd thought they might have better sense. Thank you for the invitation, Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Lady Ashford descended on them next, her smile sharp. Miss Whitmore, how unexpected, and how charmingly unconventional your dress is, so practical. It was an insult wrapped in compliment, designed to make Clara feel inferior without being overtly rude. Thank you, Clara said evenly. I find excessive ornamentation impractical for someone who spends most of her time doing actual work. The subtle jab landed. Lady Ashford's smile tightened. How industrious. His Grace, you must find such dedication admirable. I find it necessary, Adrian said coolly. Real work requires dedication, unlike social posturing. The conversation fractured after that, other guests pulling them in different directions. Clara found herself surrounded by women whose names she barely remembered, all asking pointed questions designed to reveal scandal. So how did you and the Duke become acquainted? Through mutual research interests. How romantic. And how long have you been researching together? Several months. Must be quite intensive research to warrant such frequent meetings. Clara felt her temper fraying. These women didn't care about truth. They were fishing for confirmation of their worst assumptions. Actually, Clara said, her voice cutting through the chatter, the Duke has been generous enough to provide access to undisturbed primrose populations on his estate. I'm conducting field research on mycorrhizal associations in chalk grassland ecosystems. Blank stares met her explanation. It's groundbreaking work, Clara continued, warming to the topic despite her audience. Previous studies have focused on competitive exclusion, but my research suggests cooperation through fungal networks is actually more significant for population survival. It challenges fundamental assumptions about plant community ecology. More blank stares. How fascinating, someone finally managed. And the Duke is interested in such things? The Duke recognizes meaningful research when he sees it, Clara said firmly, unlike some people who prefer gossip to actual intellectual engagement. The group dispersed shortly after that. Clara wasn't sure if she'd won that exchange or simply confirmed their worst opinions of her. Either way, she felt exhausted. Dinner was a marathon of discomfort. Clara was seated far from Adrian, deliberately, she suspected, surrounded by people who viewed her as either amusing curiosity or dangerous threat. The food was excellent, but might as well have been sawdust for all she tasted it. She was counting minutes until escape when Lady Pemberton's voice carried from further down the table, spending quite inappropriate amounts of time at his estate. Unchaperoned, from what I understand. Though she claims it's for research. It is research, Clara said loudly, cutting across 3 other conversations. The table fell silent. Lady Pemberton turned to her with false sweetness. Oh, I meant no offense, dear. I'm sure your little plant study is quite important to you. Little plant study? Clara felt something snap inside her. Every insult, every dismissal, every condescending pat on the head she'd endured over the years condensed into white-hot anger. I'm conducting novel research that will fundamentally change how we understand plant ecology. I've documented mycorrhizal colonization patterns never before observed in primrose populations. I've proven that cooperation, not just competition, drives community structure. And yes, I've done it at the Duke's estate because he's one of the few people intelligent enough to recognize groundbreaking work when he sees it. Clara, someone tried to interrupt. No. Clara stood, her chair scraping loud in the silence. I'm tired of being patronized by people who wouldn't recognize meaningful research if it flowered in their dinner plates. I'm tired of having my work dismissed as a hobby or little study by people who've never contributed anything more significant than gossip to society. Every eye was on her now. Clara could feel Adrian's gaze like a physical thing, but she couldn't look at him. Couldn't stop now that she'd started. You all want to know if there's scandal between the Duke and myself? Here's the truth. Yes, we're courting. Yes, I spend time at his estate. Yes, we have intellectual conversations that you'd find boring and incomprehensible. And no, I don't care what any of you think about it. Clara's voice shook but held steady. Because at the end of the day, Olive contributed something real to human knowledge. What will you have? More gossip, more speculation, more ways to make women feel small for daring to be more than decorative? The silence that followed was absolute. Then Adrian stood, his movement deliberate, drawing every eye. Clara's research will be presented at the Royal Society this autumn, he said, his voice cutting through the room. Her findings represent the most significant advancement in mycorrhizal ecology in decades. Anyone dismissing her work as trivial is simply advertising their own ignorance. Someone gasped. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Furthermore, Adrian continued, his expression harder than she'd ever seen it, Miss Whitmore has more integrity and intelligence than this entire room combined. If society chooses to ostracize her for refusing to pretend to be less than she is, that says everything about society and nothing about her. He moved around the table to stand beside Clara, offering his arm. Shall we? Clara took it, her legs trembling. They walked out together, the silence behind them gradually exploding into frenzied whispers. Outside in the cool night air, Clara finally let herself breathe. That was, she started. Spectacular, Adrian finished. Absolutely spectacular. I just destroyed any remaining shred of my reputation. You just proved you're extraordinary. He turned to face her fully. Clara, that was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. Standing up in front of people who've spent years trying to diminish you and refusing to be diminished anymore. They'll never accept me now. Who cares? Adrian's vehemence surprised her. Let them reject you. Let them whisper and speculate and judge. You just declared yourself free of their opinions. That's not destruction. That's liberation. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his face that made her breath catch. Not just admiration or attraction, but something deeper. Recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who'd spent years performing for an audience that would never truly accept them. I need to finish the research, she said. Need to make sure the Royal Society presentation is undeniable. You will. How can you be so certain? Because you're you, Adrian said simply. And being you has always been enough. Clara kissed him there in the Ashford garden, not caring who might see. His arms came around her immediately, solid and steady and real. When they finally pulled apart, Clara felt different, lighter somehow, despite the weight of what she'd just done. What happens now? She asked. Now, you go back to your research. You finish what you started. You prove to everyone what I already know, that you're remarkable. Adrian traced her cheekbone with gentle fingers. And I'll be right there beside you, believing in you even when you doubt yourself. That's all I need, Clara whispered. Good. Because that's all I know how to give. They stood there as the darkness, two people who'd never quite fit anywhere finding their fit with each other. The scandal would be enormous. The social consequences severe, the path forward uncertain and probably painful. But for the first time in her life, Clara felt entirely, authentically herself. And that was worth any cost. The next morning, a letter arrived at the Whitmore house. Clara opened it with shaking hands, recognizing the Royal Society seal. Inside, a single sentence changed everything. The committee requests your presence at the autumn session to present your findings on mycorrhizal associations in primrose populations. We look forward to your contribution to botanical science. Clara read it 3 times, unable to believe it was real. Then she ran to the greenhouse where her father was reading the morning paper. Papa, look! Robert took the letter, read it carefully, then pulled his daughter into a fierce embrace. I'm so proud of you. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. When she saw Clara's face, her expression crumbled into something between joy and tears. You did it, Eleanor whispered. You actually did it. Not yet, Clara said. I still have to present, still have to prove the work holds up to scrutiny. You will, Robert said firmly, because you're brilliant and stubborn and too determined to fail. Clara felt tears stream down her face, relief and terror and triumph all mixed together. She'd taken the hardest path possible, refused every shortcut, insisted on proving herself on her own merit. And it was working. She'd won the first battle, not the war. That was still to come. But this first crucial victory changed everything. Clara was no longer just the eccentric botanist. She was a researcher with work substantial enough to warrant Royal Society attention. A woman whose contributions would be documented in official scientific records, whose name would appear in journals alongside established scholars. She was exactly what she'd always wanted to be, enough on her own merit. And she'd done it without compromising who she was. The months between the Royal Society invitation and the actual presentation passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Clara worked 16-hour days, double-checking every measurement, verifying every conclusion, preparing for questions that would inevitably come. The data was solid. She knew it was solid, but knowing wasn't enough. She needed it to be unassailable. Adrian appeared at the estate most weekends, ostensibly to review accounts, but actually to make sure she ate and occasionally slept. He never pushed, never demanded her attention, just existed in her orbit like a gravitational constant. Sometimes they talked about the research. More often, they sat in comfortable silence while she worked, and he read. The quiet companionship more valuable than conversation. You're going to exhaust yourself, he said one evening in late August, finding her still in the library at midnight, surrounded by papers and sketches. I'm almost done, Clara rubbed her eyes, which felt full of sand. Just need to finalize the visual aids for the presentation. Adrian moved behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders. Clara, when was the last time you slept more than 4 hours? Sleep is for people who don't have to prove themselves to rooms full of men who think women's brains are physiologically incapable of scientific reasoning. Sleep is for people who want to remain conscious during their presentations. His thumbs pressed into the knots of tension along her shoulders. You've done the work. The research is extraordinary, but you'll undermine everything if you collapse from exhaustion before you can present it. Clara knew he was right, but couldn't make herself stop. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant acknowledging how terrified she actually was. What if I'm wrong? What if there's a flaw I didn't see, an alternative explanation I didn't consider? Then you'll address it. You're brilliant at thinking on your feet. Adrian's hand stilled on her shoulders. But Clara, you're not wrong. I've reviewed your methodology. It's meticulous. Your conclusions follow logically from the data. This is good work, groundbreaking work. You're biased. I'm honest. He came around to face her, crouching so they were eye level. I wouldn't tell you the research was strong if it wasn't. That would be doing you a disservice. Clara searched his face, looking for false reassurance, found only steady certainty. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. I know. He took her hands, his grip warm and solid. But you're also ready. More ready than anyone I've ever seen attempt something like this. Will you be there? At the presentation? I wouldn't miss it. His expression shifted, became more serious. Though I should warn you, my being there will likely fuel more speculation. People will assume I used my influence to secure your invitation. Let them assume. Clara felt a spark of her earlier defiance return. I know the truth, you know the truth. That's what matters. Still, you should be prepared for... I'm prepared for everything, Clara interrupted. The worst gossip, the harshest criticism, the assumption that I slept my way into that presentation room. I'm prepared for all of it. What I wasn't prepared for was having someone believe in me unconditionally. Her voice cracked slightly. So yes, please be there. Let them speculate. I need you there anyway. Adrian kissed her forehead, gentle and brief. Then I'll be there. The night before the presentation, Clara couldn't sleep at all. She paced her bedroom, rehearsing arguments, anticipating objections, running through contingencies until her mind felt like tangled yarn. Around 3 a.m, she gave up and went to the greenhouse. Surrounded by her plants, in the space where she'd always felt most herself, some of the panic finally eased. Can't sleep either? Clara jumped. Her father stood in the doorway, still in his nightshirt, his medical bag in hand. Just got back from a call, Robert explained. Mrs. Henderson's baby decided 3 a.m. was an excellent time to arrive. He set down his bag and joined her among the seedlings. Want to talk about it? About what? Whatever's got you pacing in the greenhouse at 3 a.m. Clara touched a primrose leaf, the same species she'd spent months studying. What if I fail tomorrow? What if the presentation is a disaster and I prove everyone right, that I was presumptuous to think I belonged in that room? Then you'll have failed trying something brave instead of succeeding at something safe, Robert said. But Clara, you won't fail. I've read your research. It's extraordinary. You're my father. You have to say that. I'm also a scientist. And as a scientist, I'm telling you this work will change how botanists understand plant communities. He paused. As your father, I'm telling you I'm proud of you regardless of what happens tomorrow. You've already accomplished something remarkable. You've proven you can stand on your own merit. The presentation is just documentation of what I've always known. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I'm terrified. Good. Terror means it matters. Robert squeezed her shoulder. Now go try to sleep. You need to be sharp tomorrow. The Royal Society building loomed like a cathedral to reason, all classical architecture and institutional gravitas. Clara stood outside at precisely 1:45 p.m., her presentation materials clutched in trembling hands, trying to force air into lungs that seemed to have forgotten how breathing worked. Miss Whitmore? She turned. Dr. Harrison, the orchid lecturer from months ago, stood behind her, his expression kind. I wanted to catch you before you went in, he said. I've reviewed your research proposal. It's genuinely impressive work. Clara blinked. Thank you. That means a great deal coming from you. I also wanted to warn you. His voice dropped. There are members in there who will challenge you aggressively. Not because the work is flawed, but because they object to your presence on principle. Don't let them rattle you. Answer their questions factually, stand your ground, and remember, you've earned your place in that room. Even though I'm a woman? Especially because you're a woman who did work most men couldn't accomplish. He smiled. Give them hell, Miss Whitmore. The presentation room was smaller than Clara expected, but somehow more intimidating. Rows of seats filled with men, distinguished scholars, established researchers, fellows of the Royal Society. And in the back corner, trying to be inconspicuous and failing entirely, Adrian sat rigid with tension. Their eyes met. He nodded once, steady, certain, believing in her even when she couldn't believe in herself. Clara set up her visual aids with hands that only shook slightly. Then she turned to face the room. Gentlemen, she began, her voice steadier than expected. My research examines mycorrhizal associations in primrose populations on chalk downland. Previous studies have focused primarily on competitive exclusion as the driver of community structure. My findings suggest this framework is incomplete. She launched into the presentation, years of preparation crystallizing into clear, logical argument. The data was compelling, the methodology sound. The conclusions followed inevitably from the evidence. For 20 minutes, she held the room's complete attention. Then came the questions. Miss Whitmore, a white-haired scholar in the front row, began, his tone dripping condescension. Your methodology involves extensive excavation. How can we be certain you didn't damage the very root structures you were attempting to study? Clara had anticipated this. Excellent question. We used controlled excavation techniques developed specifically for this study. Each root system was removed in intact soil blocks, then carefully washed to expose structures without mechanical damage. I can provide photographic documentation of our process. And your microscopic analysis? Who performed that work? The implication was clear. Surely she hadn't been capable of sophisticated microscopy herself. I did, Clara said firmly, using a Zeiss compound microscope at 400 times magnification. I can provide my original slides for independent verification if the committee doubts my competence. A murmur ran through the room. The scholar's face reddened. Another hand raised. Your conclusions about cooperation through fungal networks, this contradicts established competition theory. Aren't you perhaps overinterpreting the data to support a predetermined narrative? I'm interpreting this data as it exists, Clara countered. Competition theory has dominated because previous researchers looked only at above-ground interactions. My work examines below-ground relationships that previous studies ignored. The cooperation I'm documenting isn't theoretical. It's measurable, quantifiable, and reproducible. By you, someone interjected. But can others reproduce these results? That's the point of scientific publication, Clara said, letting steel enter her voice. I'm presenting the methodology so others can replicate it. If my conclusions are wrong, replication will prove it. But you can't dismiss findings simply because they challenge existing frameworks. That's not science. That's dogma. The room erupted in whispers. Clara saw several heads nodding. Not everyone was hostile. Some genuinely engaged with the work. An older gentleman in the third row stood. Clara recognized him from his publications. Dr. Edmund Wright, one of the most respected botanists in Britain. Miss Whitmore, he said, his voice measured. Your work is meticulous, the data compelling. The conclusions, while challenging to establish theory, appear well supported. He paused. I have only one question. Why haven't you published this through traditional channels? Why bring it directly to this committee? Clara took a breath. This was the moment. The truth or a polite evasion? She chose truth. Because traditional channels are closed to women, Dr. Wright. Journal editors reject submissions from female researchers without serious review. Universities deny us laboratory access. Scholarly societies refuse our membership. She met his eyes steadily. I'm here because I have no other venue. Not because I wanted special treatment, but because the normal paths aren't available to me. The silence that followed was absolute. And yet, Dr. Wright continued quietly, despite these obstacles, you've produced work that surpasses what many male researchers accomplish with full institutional support. That speaks to either exceptional ability or exceptional determination. Both, Clara said. It's required both. Dr. Wright smiled. A genuine smile, warm and approving. Then I propose we accept Miss Whitmore's research for publication in our proceedings. And furthermore, I propose we consider how many other brilliant researchers we're excluding through our current institutional barriers. That's preposterous, someone started. Is it? Dr. Wright turned to face the room. We claim to value merit, yet we systematically exclude half the population from contributing to scientific advancement. How many discoveries have we missed because talented women were told their proper place was the drawing room rather than the laboratory? The debate that followed was heated. Clara stood at the front of the room, watching men argue about her competence, her research, her very right to be present. It should have been humiliating. Instead, it felt almost surreal, like watching a play where she was both subject and audience. Through it all, she kept her spine straight and her expression neutral. She'd said her piece. The work spoke for itself. Whatever happened now was beyond her control. Finally, the committee chair called for a vote. All in favor of accepting Miss Whitmore's research for publication? Hands rose. Clara counted quickly. Not all, but more than half. Significantly more than half. Motion carries. Miss Whitmore, your research will be published in our autumn proceedings. The chair's expression was unreadable. Congratulations. Clara felt her knees go weak. Thank you. Thank you. We'll be in touch regarding editorial review. The chair paused. And Miss Whitmore? Excellent work. Truly excellent. The room began to disperse. Several members approached to ask detailed questions about methodology. Dr. Wright shook her hand firmly, promising to write a supporting editorial. Dr. Harrison gave her a knowing smile. Through it all, Clara felt like she was floating. She'd done it. Actually done it. Proven her work was worthy of publication in the most prestigious botanical journal in Britain. Adrian waited until the room had mostly cleared before approaching. His face showed carefully controlled emotion, but his eyes were bright with something fierce. Proud of you doesn't begin to cover it, he said quietly. Clara felt tears threaten. I was terrified I'd fail. You were magnificent, confident, knowledgeable, unshakable under pressure. He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. They tried to intimidate you, and you refused to be intimidated. It was remarkable. Some of them still think I don't belong here. Some of them are idiots. The ones who matter recognized your work's value. Adrian moved slightly closer. Clara, you just became one of the first women to have research published in Royal Society proceedings. That's historic. The weight of it hit her suddenly. Not just her personal victory, but what it meant for other women. The door she'd just forced open, however slightly, for those who'd come after. I need to sit down, she said weakly. Adrian guided her to a bench outside the building. They sat in silence while Clara processed everything that had just happened. The autumn air was cool, carrying the smell of dying leaves and approaching winter. What happens now? She asked eventually. Now you revise the paper based on committee feedback. It gets published. You become a recognized voice in botanical research. Adrian paused. And every woman who's been told she's not capable of scientific work has proof that's a lie. Clara turned that over. That feels like a lot of responsibility. It is, but you're capable of bearing it. They sat watching London traffic pass. Carriages and carts, workers and gentility, all mixed together in the city's constant flow. Clara felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. There's something I need to say, Adrian began, his voice careful. About us. About what comes next. Clara's stomach clenched. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just honest. He turned to face her properly. I'm not good at this. At feelings, at romance, at being the kind of partner that novels describe. I'm probably never going to write you poetry or make grand romantic gestures. I know that, but I choose you, he continued. Every day, in every way I know how, I choose you. I choose your brilliant mind and your stubborn pride and your refusal to be anything other than exactly who you are. I choose your passion for fungal networks and your complete disinterest in proper social behavior. I choose all of it, all of you, even the parts that terrify me. Clara felt her throat tighten. Adrian, I'm not asking you to marry me, he said quickly. Not yet. Not until you're ready. But I need you to know, this isn't casual for me. This isn't an experiment or a diversion. This is me committing to you in the only way I know how, completely, permanently, if you'll have me. Clara stared at him, this severe man who'd somehow become the center of her world. You're aware that choosing me means choosing a lifetime of botanical fieldwork, ink-stained fingers, and probably more scandal? I'm counting on it. And you understand that I'm never going to be a conventional duchess? That I'll keep working, keep researching, keep doing things that make society clutch their pearls? I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Clara felt a smile break across her face. Then yes, I choose you too. Your emotional constipation and your inability to relax and your terrible habit of trying to solve all my problems for me, even when I tell you not to. Adrian laughed, real and genuine and completely unguarded. We're both disasters. Complementary disasters, Clara corrected, like mycorrhizal partners. Better together than separate. Are you comparing our relationship to fungal networks again? I'm a botanist. Everything reminds me of plants. He kissed her there on the bench outside the Royal Society, propriety be damned. Clara kissed him back, tasting triumph and relief, and the beginning of something that looked surprisingly like happiness. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and grinning, Clara realized several pedestrians were staring. We just scandalized at least a dozen people, she observed. Good, Adrian said. Let them be scandalized. I'm done hiding how I feel about you. They walked back through London together, neither quite ready to return to their separate lives. The afternoon was fading toward evening, the autumn light turning everything golden. When will you propose? Clara asked. Officially, I mean. When you least expect it, Adrian replied. Probably in a greenhouse, surrounded by plants when you're covered in dirt and talking about root structures. That sounds perfect. It does, doesn't it? They parted at Clara's house, a brief kiss that promised more later. Eleanor met her at the door, her face anxious. Well, she demanded. How did it go? Clara felt her smile widen. They accepted it. For publication. In the official proceedings. Eleanor's face crumpled. She pulled Clara into a fierce embrace, her body shaking with what might have been tears. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. I did. Clara held her mother tight, feeling years of tension finally release. I really did. Lily thundered down the stairs, followed more sedately by their father. Both stopped when they saw Clara's face. You're published? Lily shrieked. I'm published! Lily launched herself at Clara, nearly knocking her over. Robert joined the embrace, his arms encircling all three of them. "My brilliant daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you'd accomplish remarkable things." They celebrated that night with an improvised dinner. Nothing fancy, just the family together, laughing and talking over each other in their small dining room. Clara felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. Not just accomplishment, but belonging. Being fully herself and being accepted exactly as she was. Later, alone in her room, Clara pulled out the pressed flowers Adrian had given her. The primrose and the lily carefully preserved. She added a third, a small orchid bloom he'd given her last week from his conservatory. 3 flowers, 3 stages of their impossible relationship. She was tucking them back into the historical text when she noticed something new. A 4th flower pressed between different pages. A rose. Dark red, perfectly preserved. And underneath it, in Adrian's precise handwriting, "You were always enough. I'm grateful you finally believed it too." Clara pressed the book to her chest and let herself cry. Relief and joy, and the overwhelming feeling of being seen completely. The weeks following publication passed in a blur of unexpected recognition. Letters arrived from other researchers asking questions about methodology. Dr. Wright invited her to collaborate on a follow-up study. The Royal Botanical Society, which had previously rejected her membership application twice, sent a formal invitation to join. Society's response was more complicated. Some families continued to shun her as scandalous. Others, particularly those with daughters interested in science, began cautiously reaching out. Clara discovered she'd accidentally become a symbol, for better or worse, of women refusing to accept limitations. It was exhausting and exhilarating and not at all what she'd expected. Adrian proposed on a Tuesday in November, exactly as he'd predicted, in her greenhouse, while she was repotting specimens and explaining their mycorrhizal associations. "Clara," he interrupted her explanation of nutrient exchange, "I have something to ask you." "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of—" "No, it can't wait." He was holding something small. Clara's heart stopped when she realized it was a ring. "I was going to do this somewhere romantic, plan something elaborate, but that's not us, is it?" "Adrian, let me finish," he said. His hands were shaking. She'd never seen his hands shake. "I love you. I'm not good at saying it. Probably won't say it often enough, but it's true. You're the most remarkable person I've ever met. You're brilliant and stubborn and completely unwilling to compromise who you are. And I want to spend the rest of my life supporting you while you change the world one fungal network at a time." Clara set down her pot, dirt-covered hands forgotten. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "It's probably the only proposal you've ever heard." "Fair point." She looked at the ring, simple gold band, no excessive ornamentation. "Is there a question somewhere in that declaration?" "Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner in all the ways that matter? Will you build a life with me that doesn't look like anyone else's life because it's ours?" She should have said yes immediately, should have thrown her arms around him and accepted without hesitation. Instead, she found herself asking the question that had haunted her for months. "What about heirs? You're a duke." Society expects a lot of things I don't care about anymore," Adrian interrupted. "If we have children, wonderful. If we don't, the title passes to some distant cousin and the world continues turning. I'm not marrying you for succession planning. I'm marrying you because I choose you. However that looks, whatever that means, I choose you." Clara felt tears stream down her face, leaving tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "I'm going to keep working, keep researching. I won't stop just because I'm married." "I know. I'll probably embarrass you at society functions. I'm counting on it. And I'll never be the perfect duchess." "Perfect is boring," Adrian said. "I'll take real over perfect every single time." Clara looked at him, this severe, controlled man who'd somehow learned to be vulnerable with her, who challenged her thinking and respected her boundaries and loved her, not despite her complications, but because of them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Adrian slipped the ring on her finger with trembling hands. Then he kissed her, gentle and thorough, tasting of tea and promises. "We're going to be terrible at this," Clara said when they finally pulled apart. "Spectacularly terrible," Adrian agreed, "but we'll be terrible together." They married in spring, in a small ceremony that scandalized traditional society and delighted everyone who actually mattered. No elaborate festivities, no hundreds of guests, just family and close friends in the Blackthorn Estate Chapel. Clara wore a simple dress, beautiful but practical, nothing that would make her feel like she was playing dress-up. Lily served as her attendant, beaming with pride. Adrian looked uncomfortable in formal attire, but kept his eyes on Clara throughout the ceremony, like she was the only person in the room. The vows were traditional with one significant modification. They'd removed obey from Clara's portion and added a mutual promise to respect each other's work and independence. The minister looked pained but read them as written. When they were finally pronounced married, Adrian kissed her thoroughly enough that several elderly relatives gasped. Clara didn't care. She was too busy feeling grateful that she'd taken the risk, made the choice, refused to settle for safety over authenticity. The reception was held outside on the same downland where Clara had conducted her research. Tables scattered across the grass, wildflowers instead of formal arrangements, food served family style rather than in courses. It was unconventional and perfect and exactly what they'd wanted. Dr. Wright gave a toast about scientific progress and breaking barriers. Eleanor cried through her entire speech about watching her daughter become her full self. Robert simply raised his glass and said, "To Clara and Adrian, may you always choose each other." As evening fell and guests began departing, Clara and Adrian stood at the edge of the downland, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Regrets?" Adrian asked. Clara thought about it honestly. "About marrying you? None. About the scandal and gossip and social consequences? Still none. About missing out on conventional life?" She turned to face him. "I never wanted conventional." "What did you want?" "This. Exactly this." She gestured at the estate, the research site, the life they were building together. "Partnership with someone who sees me clearly. Work that matters. The freedom to be myself without apology." "That's all?" Clara smiled. "And maybe some children eventually, if you're interested, but only if they can handle having a mother who's more interested in plant roots than propriety." Adrian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I think we could manage that." They stood there as darkness fell, two people who'd never quite fit anywhere finding their place together. It wasn't the happy ending that romance novels promised. There would still be struggles, still be moments of doubt and friction and disagreement. They were both too stubborn, too independent, too complicated for anything to be simple. But it was real. And real, Clara had learned, was infinitely more valuable than perfect. In the years that followed, Clara published 3 more major studies and became the first woman elected to full Royal Society fellowship. She hired female research assistants and mentored young women interested in science, creating the pathways she'd had to fight for. Adrian managed his estates with the same careful attention he brought to everything, implementing progressive agricultural practices and supporting tenant education. He never sought social prominence, but earned quiet respect for his competence and integrity. They had 2 children, both daughters, both inheriting their mother's curiosity and their father's determination. The estate rang with questions and experiments and the kind of joyful chaos that came from raising children who were encouraged to think rather than simply behave. Society eventually stopped being scandalized by them. Not because they changed, but because their relationship proved sustainable. Year after year, they remained partners, challenging each other, supporting each other, building something that didn't need outside validation to be meaningful. On their 10th anniversary, Clara found Adrian in the conservatory at dawn, carefully tending the orchid she'd diagnosed on their second meeting. It was blooming, extravagant purple flowers that hadn't appeared in all the years before. "You figured it out," she said. "Took me 10 years, but yes." He looked up, his expression soft in the early light. "Turns out even stubborn plants respond to patience and proper care." "Are we still talking about orchids? Are we ever just talking about orchids?" Clara laughed and moved into his arms, fitting there as naturally as she had that first night in his library. "I love you," she said. Words that still didn't come easily, but came true. "I love you too," Adrian replied. "My brilliant, impossible wife." "Your only wife." "Thank God for that. I couldn't handle multiple versions of you." They stood together watching the sunrise through glass panels, surrounded by growing things and built on years of choosing each other daily. It wasn't the fairy tale ending society expected. It was better, real and hard-won, and entirely their own. Clara had spent years believing she had to choose between being herself and being loved. In the end, she'd discovered the truth. Real love didn't require choosing. It required finding someone brave enough to love her exactly as she was, complications and all. And she'd found him, severe and controlled, and learning to be vulnerable. Imperfect, but willing to try. Choosing her, every day, in all the ways that mattered. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.